Kicking off the list today at number 10 is Lord Iron. Kicking off the list with Marvel 1602, otherwise known as Earth 311. This Earth takes a bunch of the Marvel characters we love and plops them in the Elizabethan era, and yes, that includes Iron Man. Going by the name Anthony Stark, aka Lord Iron, his armor is powered by quote-unquote lightning bottles, and was created when Anthony was captured in the Holy Land during the English-Spanish Wars and treated rather harshly by the Hulk, resulting in the requirement of the suit just to survive. Anthony is sent on a mission to hunt down Banner in the New World with his technologically advanced suit. Now, look, this suit in comparison to other versions of Iron Man is not the most advanced and powerful suit, and you'd expect that from the time period. But when looked at with the scope of the technology at the time, it's centuries ahead of its time, being nearly on par with the base Iron Man armors, only it has a super sweet lightning sword. Oh yeah! Number 9. Iron Man 2099. In the dark, ultra-capitalist dystopian society of Marvel 2099, Tony Stark is physically long gone. Instead, it's a guy by the name of Sonny Frisco who takes on the mantle of Iron Man. The technology behind Sonny's advanced suit of armor is a full century ahead of Tony Stark's tech, but despite that, the basic range of powers and abilities are curiously the same. Iron Man 2099 flies around at supersonic speeds and generates powerful energy blasts. Plus, he has a metric butt ton of firepower and gadgets. What I think makes Sonny Frisco better is that the character actually has an advanced intellect comparable to Tony Stark's, or even better with the knowledge of this future world. Sonny built the suit of armor himself, as any Iron Man worth his salt should, and he earned his place on the Avengers team of 2099 in the process. Number 8. Takuya Yamashiro. Instead of being Peter Parker, the Japanese Spider-Man, Spider-Man, is Takuya Yamashiro, a motocross racer and son of astrophysicist Dr. Hiroshi Yamashiro. Unlike most versions of Spider-Man, Takuya was introduced through a live-action Japanese Spider-Man TV show. With that, his character is, one, really popular, but also differs quite a bit. For starters, his spider powers are a little less powerful due to budget constraints for the show, but to make up for that, he utilizes a whole frickin' mech named Leopardon. He uses Leopardon and his spider abilities to fight the Iron Cross Army, which is a group of suspiciously human-looking aliens from an unnamed world who are led by Professor Monster. Yes, I know it's a dumb name, just let it go. Due to his popularity and just how awesome he is, Takuya has become an official character in the multiverse, coming from Earth 51778, fighting against the Inheritors alongside the Spider Army, and he is set to appear in the second animated Spider-Verse movie, which is gonna be great. Number 7. Peter Parker. Fans of this channel may know the special place that Marvel 1602 has in my heart. Written by Neil Gaiman, the story takes tons of familiar heroes and villains and displaces them into an Elizabethan setting. Our friendly neighborhood Spider, being the face of Marvel, obviously got his own 1602 version. In this world, the orphan Peter was raised by his Scottish uncle Benjamin and his wife until one year, on his birthday, Sir Nicholas Fury came to his door. Fury had known Peter's parents and sought Peter to enter into his service, and he became Fury's assistant. Now that alone, a Peter Parker who worked under Nick Fury, is a cool concept. But I think one of my favorite parts about this version of Peter is that he doesn't actually have his spider powers. Throughout the run of the comic, which saw Peter escorting Virginia Dare, visiting the Doctor Strange and Professor X of this world, meeting a ton of royalty, having run-ins with the Hulk, and traveling to the New World, Peter kept almost coming into contact with certain suspicious-looking spiders. It wasn't until the last issue of the initial comic when he was finally bit and gained superpowers.
At number 6 is Iron Hammer. This is such a cool variant because he answers the question, what would happen if Thor and Iron Man combined their abilities into one hero? When Gamora manipulates the souls of the Marvel Universe and mixes them all together, she ends up creating a whole new world called Warp World. Sounds kind of fun, doesn't it? Sounds like the name of a crappy small town arcade, and we all know those are always the best ones. But it is far from that. It's actually a universe where every soul is combined with another within the Marvel Universe. This event basically creates a mixture of Thor and Iron Man, aka Stark Odinson, son of Howard Odin. Riveting bit of writing right there. Basically, this variant ends up with a pretty cool new look as well as a brand new set of capabilities that basically combine Iron Man's wit and intelligence with Thor's supreme godlike power. I mean, even if this was just Iron Man wielding Mjolnir, it would be cool enough, but part of Thor is still in there somewhere, which makes it even more insane to imagine how powerful this variant could be.
Number 5. Starman. The original Starman was Ted Knight, a wealthy scientist who created a device called the Gravity Rod, which allowed him to fly and shoot energy blasts and stuff like that. Personally, if my ability to fly depended on being able to hold a flashlight in my hand, I'd put a strap on it, kind of like a Wii controller, but maybe that's just me. Anyway, he was a hero in the Golden Age, first appearing in 1941 and being a member of the Justice Society. He had 2 sons, David and Jack, but he could be somewhat neglectful of them because of his focus on superheroics. When he retired, he passed the mantle down to his older son David, which was fine with Jack because he thought the whole thing was dumb. David was Starman for about a week before the son of the original Starman's archenemy, the Mist, shot him with a sniper rifle. At this point, Jack reluctantly took on the mantle. He redesigned the suit to be more casual and modern, and his father gave him a gravity staff to replace the rod. The story of someone reluctantly becoming a hero while trying to reconcile with an absent father is more interesting to me than anything Ted Knight got up to in the Golden Age. So I'm calling Jack the superior Starman, and if nothing else he did better than David. Number 4. Night Owl 2. Despite being introduced in the same comics at the same time, a couple of the characters in Alan Moore's Watchmen universe are legacy characters, such as the heroes going by Night Owl. The original Night Owl was a man named Hollis Mason who was a policeman in New York in the late 30s. He decided to become a vigilante and eventually joined the masked adventurer group the Minutemen. He was a good hand-to-hand fighter, but beyond that wasn't the most impressive hero. After he retired, a man named Dan Dryberg, who had inherited a large amount of money, wrote to him and asked for permission to take up the mantle. Dan was a genius inventor, having a variety of gadgets like night vision goggles, a more advanced suit, and his owl ship, Archie. He trained with Hollis to be just as good of a martial artist, and the two became good friends until Hollis's death. Considering how much more advanced Night Owl 2 is in every sense of the word, it's hard not to consider him the superior crime fighter. Number 3. Amadeus Cho's Hulk. Amadeus Cho is a brilliant scientist not dissimilar to Bruce Banner, who is considered the 6th smartest man alive in the Marvel Universe. He worked alongside several heroes in the decade before he became Hulk, but Banner was the first he helped. That made it very fitting when he was forced to use special nanites to absorb the Hulk's powers. This turned him into a new Hulk. But unlike Banner, who suffers from severe DID, and as a result has several different and very dangerous angry Hulks inside of him, Cho was able to keep his Hulk side relatively under control, priding himself at being a better and smarter Hulk than Banner. Now, if I was an Avenger, I would feel a lot better with Cho on my team than the unpredictable Banner. So I really do think that Cho's Hulk is the better hero, due to him rarely losing control. But setting aside the logic of who would realistically be the better hero, who wants to read a Hulk comic where he doesn't lose control? Banner is by far the more interesting of the two characters, even if Cho is a better fit for teams like the Avengers. Number 2. Tim Drake's Robin. Several people have taken on the mantle of Robin the Boy Wonder over the years, with the original being Dick Grayson. Dick operated as Robin for decades in the comics before he was finally allowed to grow up. In story, he and Batman grew apart and were having a lot of personality conflicts, so Robin quit and eventually became Nightwing. He was replaced by Jason Todd, who was a street kid Batman caught stealing the tires off the Batmobile. Jason became Robin but was never as skilled as Dick, and had a tendency to be overly aggressive and to clash with the Dark Knight, frequently disobeying orders and eventually being killed by the Joker. After this, a kid named Tim Drake realized that Batman in his grief was becoming more and more violent and reckless, and decided that Batman needed a Robin to help temper his aggression. Tim became Robin and took to the role flawlessly. Now that Tim has been replaced by Damian Wayne and has become his own hero, you could make the argument that he is not as skilled a solo hero as Dick's Nightwing or Jason's Red Hood, but as far as which of the Robins has worked the best with Batman, Tim stands above the rest, with even the original Dick Grayson having admitted that Tim was the best of the Robins. Plus, his Robin costume was a massive improvement on the classic no pants and pixie boots look both Dick and Jason had worn during their times as Robin. Number 1. Zatanna. As she is such a staple of the DC universe, albeit an extremely underrated staple, a lot of fans might not even realize that Zatanna the Magician is a legacy character. Her father, Giovanni Zatara, made his first appearance in Action Comics number 1, the same issue that featured the first appearance of Superman. Like his daughter, he performs as a stage magician, but is an actual magic wielder who is able to cast spells by speaking his incantations backwards. He uses these abilities to fight crime and do the whole superhero thing. Zatanna took a similar path as her father, but was more popular with readers. Due to her father having been dead in the comics for several years and therefore rarely showing up, and her being much easier on the eyes, not many people seek out her father's adventures, instead choosing to focus on his progeny, one of the most popular legacy characters in comics.
At number 10 we have Cyclops, aka Basilisk. This alternate Cyclops from the Age of X Alpha storyline is so intimidating that you might mistake him for a supervillain. With a backstory so dark, it'll leave you wondering how he didn't become one. It all began at the age of 14 when his powers activated without warning while he was in a movie theater, liquefying 7 people including his parents. Scott was incarcerated thereafter, eventually being transferred to Alcatraz after the Emergency Power Act rendered the prison a mutants-only facility, where he caught the attention of Arcade, who's got quite the name for a prison governor. It was thanks to Arcade that we get this epic mask, complete with ruby quartz lenses in the eye holes to inhibit Scotty's eye lasers, and a remote control mechanism that has the mask open down the middle, enabling the beams to pass through. In fact, Arcade had Scotty's eyelids surgically removed in order to prevent him from shutting off his eye beams by himself, so that he could use Scott against his will as an execution method for the other mutant inmates. And after several years of this, Scott managed to get a hold of the remote and blasted his way out of the prison, freeing the remaining mutants and vaporizing Arcade. And before you ask, no, the Basilisk does not turn people to stone with his gaze. He turns them to ash. Let's get into number 9. Doctor Strange Fate. Ah yes, the good old DC vs Marvel comics. The series that not only pit all of our favorite heroes against one another despite their conflicting franchises, but did so while introducing amalgamations of our favorite heroes and villains. One such hero was the amalgamation of Charles Xavier, Doctor Strange, and DC's Doctor Fate, but as it turns out, this convoluted mashup of a character is more than just a one-hit wonder. See, Strange Fate had discovered that restoring the Marvel and DC universes would result in the destruction of his own amalgam universe, and so he did everything that he could to try and prevent it, which, judging by the fact that you've probably never heard of this dude, was a task that he ultimately failed. However, while he couldn't prevent the destruction of his reality, he decided that he could at least save his own tail, and he did so by infusing his own psyche deep within that of Doctor Strange, where he was able to subtly manipulate the Sorcerer Supreme into creating several cross-dimensional incursions, but ultimately his existence was discovered by Batman and Access. And so, instead of just erasing the dude, Strange decides to preserve the entire amalgam universe within a pocket dimension, thus ensuring that Strange Fate would never be able to menace with the Marvel or DC universes again.
Number 8. Spooderman. Yes, I am including a poorly drawn version of Spider-Man on this list. Speaking with bad grammar, foul language, and mainly in dirty quotes that I am simply not allowed to utter on YouTube, Spooderman isn't for kids, but he's still a Spider-Man, dammit, and one with cultural impact. Spooderman was created on February 5th, 2011 on MS Paint, I'm pretty sure, and he traveled into the web of the internet, popping up here and there for years. Unfortunately, in the real world, the creator of Spooderman, YouTube channel Jordan Clory, passed away on February 14th, 2022, which was 11 days after Spooderman's 11th birthday. Spooderman is quite self-centered, often going on and on about how he has swag, but he isn't so self-centered as to not come to the aid of the Spider-Verse in the animated Spider-Verse movies. While not a central figure to the story by any means, he is seen briefly while going over the countless versions of Spider-Man throughout the multiverse. Number 7. Spider-Boy. In the world of the Amalgam universe, Peter Parker was the head of the team trying to create a clone of Super Soldier, who is a Superman Captain America amalgamation. The clone used the DNA of Peter, making it technically a clone of Peter Parker, and it had the power to warp gravity. Unfortunately, an explosion took Peter's life and awoke the clone before the time was right. In this universe, General Ross took the clone under his wing, adopting him and naming him Peter in honor of his creator. Peter, Ross, and the General made a pretty happy family until Uncle Jen was then robbed of life by a mugger. This then prompted the clone to go on as Spider-Boy, a cross of both Spider-Man, or even of Ben Reilly if you think about it, from Marvel, and Superboy from DC Comics. Spider-Boy was an instant favorite of the Amalgam universe, but unfortunately, DC and Marvel don't get along like they once did, so we probably won't see him for a very long time.
Number 6. Green Goblin. Well, not everyone is as big a fan of this version of Green Goblin. I, for one, am a pretty big fan. In the Ultimate Universe, Norman Osborn more literally mutated into a Green Goblin, a giant hulking green figure who is seemingly unstoppable and even suggested to be immortal. Not only that, but this version of Osborn was directly tied to Spider-Man, as it was his own formula that granted Peter his spider-like powers and abilities. Maybe not for everyone, but I think that is pretty cool. And sure, this goblin wasn't stealthy in most cases in comparison to his 616 version, but he definitely comes across as more menacing and intimidating from a physical standpoint, at least.
Number 5. There was an original Black Canary? Black Canary is a well-loved superhero in the DC universe, but not everyone realizes that Dinah Lance was not the original hero to go by this name. Her mother, Dinah Drake, was the original Black Canary. First appearing in Flash Comics number 86 all the way back in 1947. Originally her MO was similar to the Green Hornets, with her posing as a criminal in order to get close to and then take out criminals, but she soon abandoned this plan and became a more straightforward crime fighter. She had no powers, but was a skilled fighter and acrobat who was known for training canaries to do amazing feats. She joined the Justice Society and married a detective named Larry Lance. She eventually gave up the mantle and was replaced by her daughter, Dinah Laurel Lance, in 1969's Justice League of America number 75. The second Black Canary is far more effective than her mother, being one of the greatest martial artists on the planet, according to official canon being evenly matched with Batman. She has a keen tactical mind, and although she doesn't train birds, she possesses the metahuman gene, which gives her her signature ability, the Canary Cry, a devastating sonic attack capable of damaging objects and hurting her enemies. Number 4. Johnny Storm's Human Torch is fantastic. The original Human Torch was a humanoid android designed by a scientist to be a perfect imitation of humanity. Due to a bizarre design flaw, whenever the android was exposed to air, he would burst into an extremely hot flame. The android achieved sentience and went on a run through the city, burning everything he touched and being unable to control his fire. He eventually learned how to control himself and became one of the most popular Marvel crime fighters of the Golden Age. He was retired as a character not long after the end of the Golden Age, and his name and power set were reused for Johnny Storm when the Fantastic Four stories began being published at the beginning of the Silver Age. He was eventually brought back, but it is fair to say that he is the more obscure version of the character, with Johnny not only being much more powerful, but much more interesting than the Jim Hammond android. Number 3. Wally West, a Generations Flash. Similar to how Dick Grayson got the Batman gig, Wally West started out as Barry Allen's sidekick, Kid Flash. When Barry Allen seemingly died in the Crisis on Infinite Earths, his old sidekick took up the mantle. Unlike other legacy characters who took on the original hero's legacy for like a year, Wally was the main Flash in DC continuity from 1986 all the way until 2009. In this time, he became a fan-favorite version of the character, being more quippy and impulsive than his mentor. Wally was so popular that when the Justice League animated series came out in 2003, Wally was the featured speedster, not Barry. In fact, when Barry was eventually brought back in 2009, many fans were quick to point out that Barry had been rewritten to have many of the personality traits that had made Wally so beloved. Number 2. Hal Jordan, Earth's greatest Green Lantern. The original Green Lantern, Alan Scott, got his powers when a mystical entity called the Starheart came to Earth and took on the shape of a lantern. It saved Alan from a train wreck and gave him the mental instructions to build himself a power ring which would create energy constructs. He became the first Green Lantern and joined the Justice Society. As the Golden Age of comics ended, his series was cancelled and he became somewhat obscure. 8 years after his cancellation, the title and concept of Green Lantern was reinvented, and we were introduced to Hal Jordan in 1959. He was a test pilot who was chosen to join the Green Lantern Corps, a group of space cops tasked with defending the galaxy. Hal got a better look than Alan, he was given more power, and most importantly, was part of a group that lent itself to a rich and complex mythology that is much more beloved by fans than the original Golden Age version of the character. Number 1. Barry Allen was so cool he started the Silver Age. The original Flash, appearing in 1940, was Jay Garrick, a college student who accidentally inhaled heavy water vapors while taking a smoke break in his lab. This gave him his super speed, which allowed him to become the hero, the Flash. Jay's Flash was known for wearing a simple red shirt with a lightning bolt and a kettle helmet with golden wings on the sides. When Flash was reinvented in the late 50s, his new identity was Barry Allen, a crime lab scientist who was hit by lightning and doused with chemicals and became able to tap into the Speed Force. Barry was given a much more iconic costume and series of rogues to fight, and his introduction is often referred to as the start of the Silver Age of comics. In an odd move, it was revealed that in Barry's universe, the adventures of Jay Garrick were comic books that Barry read as a child, inspiring him to call himself Flash. In the iconic Flash of Two Worlds story, it was revealed that Jay actually lived in a different world in the multiverse. The comics were a result of the writer being psychically influenced by the multiverse. This was later retconned and Jay became the Flash of the World War II era rather than a semi-fictional figure. But most of what we love about the Flash was introduced not by Jay's time as the Scarlet Speedster, but Barry's.
Kicking off the list at number 10 is Spider-Man Punisher. Yes, I am sort of cheating for this one. On Earth 71928, location of the What If Peter Parker Became the Punisher story, Peter Parker, well, becomes the Punisher. It's in the title. On the night Uncle Ben's life was drawn to a close, instead of following the classic story, Peter caught and dispatched the killer using the same weapon that took his uncle's life. From that moment, Peter tried to avoid going full murderous Punisher at first, but having taken the first step and knowing how much more permanent of a solution it is to just take them out, he went full force into that lifestyle. He carried the iron that took Uncle Ben's life as well as a large assortment of other weaponry, including his web shooters with multiple different types of ammunition that allowed him to take down the Sinister Six with ease, and he was even able to save Gwen Stacy. So technically this Punisher was not only better than Punisher, but also a more effective crime fighter than Spider-Man himself, in a way. Number 9, Punisher 2099. In the far-flung future of the year 2099, Frank Castle was long gone. So, Jake Gallows took up the fight. Jake was an officer of the Public Eye Police Force. In an attack ordered by Kron Stone, the Venom of 2099, Jake lost his mother, brother, and sister-in-law, while also being gravely injured himself. Being inspired by the war journals of Frank Castle, after his recovery, Jake became the new Punisher, taking up the crusade on crime after getting his revenge on Venom. Jake specifically sought out justice for the poor, using his 2099 technology alongside modern and futuristic weaponry to operate as a vigilante before serving as Victor Von Doom's Minister of Punishment. You'll see him most recently in the recent Savage Avengers comics, but no spoilers, so sorry.
At number 8, we have Jean Grey the Conqueror. We all know Marvel just loves to introduce super cool takes on our favorite characters and then proceed to do absolutely nothing with them. I'm looking at you, Galactus Buster Armor, and no missed opportunity makes me as sad as this entry does, cause in the all-new X-Men number 25, we're briefly told about numerous dark realities which don't end very well for our X-Men, including an alternate reality in which Jean Grey was consumed by her inner darkness and went on to conquer the planet by force. You see, a couple realities next door, and Jean Grey ain't the telepathic sweetheart we all know and love, on account of the fact that her early formative years were not spent with Charles Xavier, who was to teach her how to control her powers and to help her mold her persona, thus putting her in touch with her humanity. Instead, the Jean of this Earth listened to Magneto, who taught her how it was a mutant's birthright to conquer, leading her to decide that the reason she was born with her powers was just that. And I don't know about you, but I definitely need the whole story which takes place in this reality. Marvel, if you're listening, get on it. At number 7, we have Professor Drake. Old Man Winter over here proves single-handedly that there is still hope for those of us who can't grow a beard. But who is the Ice Master, you ask? Well, simply put, he's the elderly future version of our favorite Iceman, with a new fitting superhero name to match his wizard-like appearance. See, fashion doesn't get much better in the future, so Ice Master makes do with his cloak. But the most notable difference, besides the beard of course, is how the Ice Master is able to more effectively channel his ice powers thanks to that ice spear of his. Man, if I had $1 for every time I said ice. Ice Master only really comes around with his presence as needed in the past, like that time he came from the future to the present to tell his younger self to give up fighting as it only leads to a dark future. Iceman ain't too convinced and the two even duke it out against one another. But they don't stay at each other's throats for long. In fact, during the second issue of Battle of the Atom, we get to see Iceman across 3 different eras fighting alongside each other. But regardless of which era we're talking about, I'm sure a lot of us can agree that Ice Master is the coolest. Ice cool, that is.
Number 6, Nightcrawler. Much like Rogue, the Ultimate Universe Kurt Wagner was kidnapped from Germany by Weapon X and brutally trained as one of their agents. But none of the brutal mistreatment dampened his spirits. He still remained true to his faith and even stopped Storm from killing the Weapon X commander. He was decidedly more serious than his main universe counterpart, and while some may not like that, I think it works here. I don't know. He struggled with his obvious physical differences, which made him lonely to the point of kidnapping Dazzler to manipulate her into falling in love with him. That part's not so great, but he did overcome his homophobia to be able to accept Colossus, which wins him a whole bunch of points. Also, his costume and overall look was just way better in my opinion. I don't know.
Number 5. Superboy Prime. Superboy Prime isn't even really an alternate of Superboy, he's more an alternate of Superman. Why do I love him so much and think he's better than main continuity Kal-El? It's because he's so complex when it comes to his character. And well, you know, because he's villainous. You know me, I love a good superhero turned villain story. But even in being a villain, he isn't a two-dimensional character. He's a villain whose motives you pretty much understand, which is a big part of why I love a good villain. A good villain is justified in their actions, at least somewhat. You can understand why they do what they do, and Superboy Prime is an alternate of Superman who started as a hero and who desperately wanted to be a hero, but who after suffering a pretty great loss ended up, well, becoming a villain. And I mean, kinda makes sense. Number 4. Batman Who Laughs. Batman Who Laughs is probably one of the most popular Batman alternates around at this point, and there is a good reason why. The dude is insane and insanely cool as well. Batman Who Laughs is a version of Bruce Wayne who has been infected by Joker venom after being pushed past his breaking point and choosing to kill the Joker, who was dying from illness at the time anyways, by snapping his neck. In so doing, Batman released some Joker venom which was either intentionally or coincidentally stored within Joker's spinal column. After breathing in this toxin, Bruce found himself changing and becoming more sadistic and Joker-like. In the end, he would become a powerful villain and even turn on almost all of the Bat family members, killing them in cold blood. He would become known as the Batman Who Laughs and would go on to terrorize and threaten the multiverse and the very fabric of reality as we know it within DC lore. Number 3. The Maker. Speaking of villains that we love, one of my all-time favorites is actually a variant of another superhero, this time from Marvel Comics as opposed to DC. That is right, we are talking about the Maker from the pages of Ultimate Comics. The Maker is the alternate version of Reed Richards who hails from the reality of Earth 1610, or the Ultimate Universe. Why do I love him even more than the original? Because he's so brilliantly twisted and evil. He's basically like Reed if he lost his moral and ethical compass completely, and sometimes I feel like that's questionable even for Reed in 616. The Maker is all about science and often disregards the ethical component holding back advancement or experimentation. He's dangerous, evil, and perfectly fun when it comes to everything that he's capable of. I love the Maker because I've always thought that Reed had amazing potential to be an even better villain than he is a hero, and the Maker is that concept or idea fully executed and brought to life. Number 2. Superman Prime. Why do I love Superman Prime? Because this alternate version of Superman from the DC 1 Million universe perfectly embodies what Superman is supposed to be all about. He's all about hope, baby. And even when we think he's gone, he lives on within Lois's belief in him, and then proves her belief in him to be pretty well founded when he returns years later, and it is revealed that Superman actually survived his impending death. But not just that, we also learn that Superman actually has become even more powerful during this time away from Earth. Possibly, this is one of, if not the most powerful versions of Superman that we've ever seen in comics. This has to do in part with him being charged by the Super Sun, but also has to do with the fact that Kal-El went on various space adventures upon leaving Earth, where he basically gained many different skills and tons of wisdom besides. So yeah, just kind of Superman at his best. Number 1. Cosmic Ghost Rider. Probably one of my all-time favorite heroes, just in general. Never mind just as an alternate. Cosmic Ghost Rider is an alternate version of both Ghost Rider and Punisher. This is a version of Frank Castle that died when Thanos attacked Earth. Castle decided to make a deal to return to Earth as a spirit of vengeance, but when he came back it was too late and everyone had basically already died. Alone on Earth for years, Castle as Ghost Rider slowly lost his mind. Eventually he teamed up with Galactus to try and defeat Thanos, and when that failed he decided he may as well submit and just like join Thanos at this point, despite the fact that he was the ultimate villain for Cosmic Ghost Rider. Cosmic Ghost Rider goes on to become Thanos' herald, and later on would have adventures following his death and return, where he would do things like try to travel back in time to raise Thanos himself in order to prevent him from becoming a galactic level threat who we often refer to as the Mad Titan. By the way, that story did not work out for Cosmic Ghost Rider, sadly, but hey, you know, he tried. You don't know till you try.
Number 10. Laura Kinney's Wolverine. The original Wolverine is one of the most popular Marvel Comics characters, having won over the world with his grumpy, fuzzy Canadianness. But here's the thing, because he is so popular and written by so many people, he has a tendency to be kind of inconsistent. At his best, Logan is tough but with a heart of gold, being capable of extreme violence but struggling with the fact that he has the potential to be a feral monster. At his worst, he is written as a psycho who is constantly picking fights with his teammates and continuously talking to no one in particular about how tough he is. His daughter, a half-clone named Laura Kinney, aka X-23, has similar powers, but is less prone to alienating her teammates, being able to get close to people a lot easier than Logan. When Logan died, she took up the Wolverine mantle for a while and managed to be just as skilled and effective, while also showing a lot more emotional maturity than her predecessor. So, while I think Logan is the more interesting character, I think the claim that he's the best there is at what he does is up for debate. Oh, and for what it's worth, when the characters first met and fought, Laura outfought and outsmarted Logan by plugging his wounds with mud so that they couldn't heal over and he would bleed out. Number 9. Connor Kent's Superboy. In 1949, the Superboy series began being published, telling the stories of a young Clark Kent and how he fought crime as Superboy before eventually growing up to be Superman. It detailed his life growing up in Smallville, fighting villains, and teaming up with the time-traveling Legion of Superheroes and Crypto the Superdog. It was a fun, campy series, but other than the character's age, there wasn't really much difference between his Superboy adventures and his Superman ones at the time. A couple continuity shakeups later, we were introduced to a new Superboy, Connor Kent. When Superman was killed by the villain Doomsday, Project Cadmus created a clone of him using a combination of Superman and Lex Luthor's DNA. Connor had slightly different powers and a teenage snark that really set him apart from the Man of Steel. And watching him navigate his complicated lineage, his desire for acceptance from Supes, his time on the Teen Titans, and his growth as a character made him a lot more interesting to read about than a young Clark Kent. I also really like the period where Superman's son John Kent becomes Superboy, but it was unfortunately cut very short when he was aged up. Number 8. Terry McGinnis's Batman. In the Batman Beyond television show, we were shown a futuristic Gotham City where Bruce Wayne had been forced to retire due to his advanced age. A teenager named Terry McGinnis stumbled upon the Batcave and used Bruce's futuristic batsuit to avenge the death of his father, impressing Bruce so much that he was offered the mantle of Batman. Terry's Batman has a lot of advantages over the original Batman, being able to turn invisible and fly with rocket boots and having enhanced strength, just to name a few. Now, this comes with a huge asterisk, as the suit was designed and built by Wayne, and Terry doesn't have the same level of skill as the original Batman, which is why he's ranked relatively low on this list. But the point that I'm trying to make is that Terry's Batman has better tech in every conceivable way than every version of Bruce Wayne at his peak. Also, credit to Terry, he was able to get under the Joker's skin in a way that Bruce never would have thought to in the Return of the Joker film. Number 7. Scott Lang's Ant-Man. People have a tendency to complain about the fact that the Ant-Man movies chose to focus on Scott Lang's time as Ant-Man rather than Hank Pym's, which I don't really get if I'm being honest. Don't get me wrong, Pym is a great character and is responsible for the creation of the tech that allows Ant-Man to shrink and grow and control ants. All that fun stuff. He first suited up as Ant-Man in 1962's Tales to Astonish number 35, but he gave up the persona and became Giant Man barely a year later in Tales to Astonish number 49. He's bounced between identities a lot, having mostly alternated between Giant Man and Yellow Jacket, but to my knowledge, knowledge, he never became Ant-Man again. On the other hand, Scott Lang has been suiting up as Ant-Man since 1979, and in his time in the costume has fought and defeated villains like Kang the Conqueror and Doctor Doom. He has way more quality stories than Pym does just by virtue of having stuck with the identity longer. You could absolutely debate whether or not Hank Pym is a better superhero than Scott, but if you're talking about who the better Ant-Man is, it's hard not to pick Scott. Number 6. Kyle Rayner's Green Lantern. The original Green Lantern was Alan Scott, but the most well-known is Hal Jordan. There are other Earth Green Lanterns such as Guy Gardner and John Stewart, who are both great characters who you could make the argument are better or more interesting than Hal, depending on your personal taste. But for this list, I gotta give it to Kyle Rayner. When Hal lost it and became the villain Parallax, he destroyed the entire Green Lantern Corps, and Kyle got the last ring, making him the only Green Lantern left. Kyle proved up to the task and managed to become a capable superhero and member of the Justice League. When he had to go up against Parallax, he managed to defeat Hal and save the planet. Later, when the planet was in danger again, he was the one who convinced Hal to redeem himself. Later, when the Corps was reformed, he was granted the title of Torchbearer for his efforts. He was a host for the Ion Entity of Will, and was chosen by every ring on the emotional spectrum to be a member of their various corps, wielding all the rings at once. This led to him becoming the White Lantern, so while he isn't a lot of people's favorite Lantern, he has done more for the Corps than any of them.
Number 5. Medusa. Honestly, I would say pretty much all of the Inhumans at this point of the Ultimate Universe are the coolest versions around, hence why I have so many of them on this list, or at least, one of the coolest versions of the Inhumans around. I would say the coolest though. I think they are the coolest. Medusa is no exception, possibly having my most favorite redesign when it comes to her character. The Medusa of Earth 1610 is still Black Bolt's queen, but seems to have been named for her familiarity and appearance to the Gorgon of Mythos. Medusa. This version of Medusa has snakes for hair. She also happens to be steadfastly loyal to her people. As I said before, we don't get to see too much of the Inhumans, but we do know that Medusa believes the Inhumans are basically superior to humans, and that distance should be maintained between their race and the humans in order to basically preserve their own culture and their own abilities. Medusa also expresses here that she has come to love her husband and accept him for who he is, despite the fact that he can never really show his love for her, at least not vocally. Which apparently is like a really big thorn in her side, because she seems to be very upset about it. She's like, Crystal, get over the fact that you don't want to hang out with us. Like, Black Bolt can't even talk to me, okay? If I can deal with that, you can deal with Maximus, okay? Let's just figure it out. Number 4. Hawkeye. Hawkeye actually has to be one of the coolest heroes in these comics, and no, I am not joking. The way they revamped this character was so impactful that the version of the character was a major influence on their MCU counterpart when it came time to pen down what that Hawkeye would be like. Clint Barton in the comics is known for being a hot mess typically, but in the Ultimate Universe, he was much more secretive, but also had a family. Tragically, his family ends up being found and killed in the process of enemies trying to hunt him down. When he is captured and severely mistreated by said captors, what does? He doesn't hang his head, he doesn't give up, he escapes, using his fingernails, his freaking fingernails as weapons. It doesn't get more badass than that. This Hawkeye does not even need arrows to be a deadly threat. I don't often get to hype Hawkeye here on Top 10 Nerd, so I just want to say thank you, Ultimate Universe, for giving me an opportunity to do so, because I do like Clint Barton, but we don't often get to put him at the top of these lists, or near the top, so yay. Number 3, Miles Morales. I know this is kind of a hot take when it comes to Spider-Man. I know there's some people in the comments who are gonna be like, I think Peter Parker is the best version. And that's fine, that's fair enough. But I really love Miles Morales in this role. Now, we do also have a Peter Parker in the Ultimate Universe of 1610, but he doesn't really do much to stand out for me in comparison to his main continuity counterpart. And don't get me wrong, I do love Peter Parker, but Miles is kind of like a breath of fresh air in some ways in comparison to the age-old hero. Why? Well, Peter has a tendency to be like really hard on himself, and aside from that, he's surrounded by tragedy at times. Honestly, there are runs where it feels like every time Peter turns a corner, a new tragedy might just be awaiting him around that corner. Miles actually has a family still living, and while he did lose his mom in the Ultimate Universe, it never really felt like a constant unresolved loss, like the death of Peter's Uncle Ben or his first love Gwen Stacy on Earth 616. And Rio, Miles' mom, is actually back now that the 1610 Miles has been permanently displaced, taking up residence in the 616 reality, and his family obviously is there with him. Miles also just has super cool powers. On top of much of what Peter has going on, Miles can also camouflage himself, and he has Venom Blast powers, so gotta give it to him. Sorry. Number 2, Gwen Stacy. Gwen Stacy is such an underrated character in the Marvel Ultimate Universe. On the Earth of 616, Gwen is, well, she's dead. Or she's probably dead. She might be showing up again soon, apparently, but it's probably a clone or like a trick or something. I don't believe it's the original Gwen Stacy. She's been dead and gone for many years. I don't think she's ever really gonna come back. In the Ultimate Universe, Gwen also kinda dies, but also kinda doesn't. She's killed by Carnage, not an alien symbiote, but kind of a lab-made one in this reality, and in essence, her consciousness becomes merged with it, meaning that Carnage becomes Gwen, and Gwen becomes Carnage. So yeah, as freaky as that sounds, in the Ultimate reality, Gwen Stacy lives on as Carnage. It's freaky and it's cool. Well, you might think this is the same as a clone Gwen in the 616 universe. It's not really. Because 1, she has the power of Carnage, and 2, she is an 100% exact biological duplicate who also possesses Gwen's mind up to the point of her death, which, you know, not all Gwen clones in 616 have, allowing Gwen to continue to grow and develop as she would have as a human, but simply with superpowers. Well, she only has superpowers for a bit, sadly. She has them until Eddie Brock's Venom assimilates Carnage, leaving her devoid of the symbiote and her powers going forward. I kinda wish she had stayed as Carnage, but it's fine. When she was Carnage though, I think that was super cool. Even though I know it was freaking her out, I thought she could have maybe become the new Carnage. That would have been neat. Number 1, The Maker. The Maker is the alternate version of Reed Richards. I actually have always felt that Richards might make a better villain than a hero, and The Maker seems to have been this thought made manifest. Living proof. Well, you know, fictional living proof. The Maker initially started out as a hero, leader of the team known as the Fantastic Four. However, in the Ultimate Universe, his and Sue's future of marital bliss was not as much guaranteed. And in fact, after the tragedy of Ultimatum and Sue Storm turning down his marriage proposal, Richards got a different perspective on life, which inevitably turned him into a villain. In this universe, Reed had a rough childhood, and part of where his villainy started was in turning on his family. A family that had mistreated him as he saw it for years. Yeah, in this reality, Reed commits patricide and matricide to get back at his parents. Very counter to his Earth 616 alternate, and that version's relationship with his family, which much better than this one.
In at 10, Jim Gordon. In the wake of Batman's apparent death against the Joker, plans for a new Batman were discussed. With Powers International laying the groundwork for a Batman-inspired task force, their first candidate chosen to model the program was Jim Gordon, who was initially hesitant to fill Batman's shoes but eventually agreed. Going through intense government training and getting surgical muscle implants, Gordon was given the first model of the new Batman robot armor, which he nicknamed Rookie, and took to the streets as the new Batman. By complete chance, he finds Bruce Wayne and informs him that he has taken up the reins as Batman, and as Gordon hears several different reports about Bruce Wayne being found dead throughout Gotham, he works with Batman to figure out that a Batman from an alternate dark universe, known as the Batman Who Laughs, is the one responsible. Tracking him down, Gordon seeks help from his estranged son, James Jr. However, another dark version of Batman arrives and introduces himself as the Grim Knight. But it's certainly jarring to see Batman go from this big bulky hero to a lanky Jim Gordon. He looks fragile, but I mean still, it's kinda dope that Gordon becomes Batman. In at 9, Flashpoint. Thomas Wayne's Batman from the Flashpoint timeline is a fascinating and tragic character, and honestly, one of my favorite versions of Batman. In this alternate universe, it was Bruce Wayne who was killed in the alleyway, causing his father, Thomas, to become Batman instead. Unlike his son's more traditional superhero version, Thomas Wayne's Batman operates more like a vigilante, using brutal and even lethal tactics to take down his enemies. He's a hardened and embittered figure who has given up hope for justice in a world riddled with corruption and violence. And I mean, given his origin, I kinda get it. I understand why. Despite his brutal methods though, Thomas is driven by a deep sense of love and protection for his wife Martha, who has gone insane and actually become the Joker in this reality after the loss of their son. He'll stop at nothing to try and save her, even if it means crossing moral boundaries boundaries. Thomas Wayne's Batman is a dark and tragic twist on the traditional Batman mythology, and he reminds us that the choices we make, even the ones made with the best intentions, can have unforeseen and devastating consequences. But also he killed Reverse Flash, which is pretty dope. And it ain't Lord Starkill. Peter Quill, known as Lord Starkill in his home universe of Earth 25271, was a notorious space pirate and leader of the Ravagers. He had a personal vendetta against Corporal Carol Danvers, the leader of the rival Zeta flight pirates. Thanos the Just was a wise and noble peacekeeper who had hired Quill to retrieve a displaced reality stone from another universe. Quill laid in wait on the planet of Gaia, anticipating the emergence of Dr. Eve and her MIM unit from an ancient temple with the reality stone, and with his trusty element rifle he skillfully incapacitated both targets from a safe distance and then claimed the stone for himself. During his journey back to the hideout, Quill contacted Thanos, much to the latter's dismay, as he preferred not to be associated with the individuals of Quill's reputation, but upon his return the hideout was suddenly attacked by the Zetas with assistance from Widower. The Ravagers valiantly fought back, managing to restrain the entire enemy team, but in a controversial move, Lord Starkill proposed selling his nemesis and her crew to Thanos to clear his own name. That's definitely a cutthroat move, and you know what, Quill? I respect it. Those are the kind of go-get-em attitudes we need in space. And it's 7, Gamora. Following the presumed demise of Peter Quill, Gamora donned his mask and assumed the mantle of Star-Lord on Earth TRN-421, taking charge as leader of the Guardians of the Galaxy. The team consisted of Drax, Groot, Rocket, Iron Man, and Charlie-27. Their mission was to confront the formidable Silver Galactus, who had absorbed the power of the Silver Surfer and become even more ravenous than ever before, and at the Forsaken Gates of Asgard, where the gods were absent, the Guardians faced off against their former teammate Vance Astro, who had become the latest Herald of Galactus. Vance deployed an army of Punisher robots to keep the Guardians occupied while his master targeted their base at Nowhere. Meanwhile, Quill, who was assumed dead, had cleverly faked his demise and taken on the persona of Major Victory, infiltrating the ranks of the Heralds of Galactus to earn the trust of Silver Galactus. So, damn.
Number 6. Captain Marvel. More powerful than the original? Mar-Vell was a member of the alien race known as the Kree, who came to Earth and took on the identity of Dr. Walter Lawson, a scientist working at Cape Canaveral, Florida. There, he met Carol Danvers, who he developed a relationship with. He became the hero Captain Marvel, and she became Miss Marvel. The two acted as superheroes for years until Mar-Vell died of lung cancer in 1982. In the time after his death, a few different characters have taken on the Captain Marvel identity, such as his son, Genis Vell, and Monica Rambeau, but in 2012, Carol Danvers took on the mantle and became the new and current Captain Marvel. An element that she does better than the original Captain is her ability to work with others. While Mar-Vell would occasionally work with other heroes, he was never made an Avenger until he was posthumously granted the honor. Carol, on the other hand, has been a member of several different teams over the years, such as the Avengers, S.H.I.E.L.D., the Guardians of the Galaxy, and the Alpha Flight space program. She is also a frequent ally of the X-Men. She is a much more involved hero, and as a result has had a much bigger impact on Marvel continuity than the original Captain Marvel.
Number 5, Kitty Pryde. Once again, it is hard for me to say that I love the Ultimate Kitty Pryde more than the main continuity Kate Pryde over 616, as I really love her dearly. But I will say that I think Ultimate Kitty Pryde had a lot of awesome stuff to offer, and that while still staying true to the heart of the character, differentiated her enough from her 616 self. And I really appreciate that, especially as a Pryde fan. Kitty in the Ultimate Universe was known for being headstrong and strong-willed. Despite her mom getting a promise from Professor X that Kitty, if enrolled in his school, would not go out on any X missions, Kitty was stubborn and snuck aboard the Blackbird to do so anyways. She would prove herself to be a formidable leader who many mutants looked up to over the years, and for a time would also be a close friend and even romantic partner of Spider-Man. The two would date and fight crime together. It was pretty cute. There is honestly a lot to love about the Ultimate Kitty Pryde. Number 4, Ben Grimm. As opposed to Ben Grimm, the college friend and roommate of Reed Richards, these two became friends when they were little kids and remained close throughout middle school. Just like in the 616 version of this story, Ben Grimm was a strong, athletic type who became the star of the football team, known by the nickname the Grim Reaper. However, it was also at this time that Reed was teased and mistreated a lot in school by other students because of his brilliant and unique mind, which made him stand out. Grimm stood up for Reed though and looked out for him, and in exchange, Richards Richards would help Ben with his homework. Eventually, Reed would be recruited to working for the Baxter Building at a young age, and the two would be split up until years later when Grimm appeared to be in the Nevada desert, near Reed's test area for his end zone experiment. Grimm joined Reed and the rest of his team, including Sue, Johnny, and Victor Van Dam, and witnessed the test, and as a result was changed forever. This version of Ben has a much more solid trajectory of accepting what he's become after he's transformed into the Thing, and although initially Sue and Reed are closer, eventually Reed ends up the odd man out, and Ben and Sue even end up together romantically, with Sue even proposing to Ben. Number 3. Silver Sable. Silver Sable has a somewhat darker origin story, if that's possible, in the Ultimate Universe. Instead of losing her mother and wanting to avenge her death, the young girl was often left to be raised by her mother, who frequently mistreated her. While she didn't know growing up, the truth that her father was absent was that he hunted down former World War II German soldiers, those who did awful things and were considered on the wrong side of the war. While on Earth 616, Silver Sable knew this and begged her father to train her. In the Ultimate Universe of Earth 1610, she didn't know of her father's true line of work until he was on his deathbed. She was brought by his associates to see him one last time, and he told her the truth about his work and apologized for not being there for her. With his dying breath, he said he wished he had had more time to teach her everything he knew. This inspired Silver Sable to follow in his footsteps, becoming a mercenary who used the money from her jobs to fund her own work and becoming the leader of the Wild Pack. Number 2. Betty Ross. In the Ultimate reality, it is Betty Ross and not Jennifer Walters who is She-Hulk. I don't think I prefer Betty's She-Hulk to Jen's She-Hulk per se, but I definitely prefer this version of Betty to the one from the main continuity of Earth 616. In this version of the story, Betty Ross fell for Bruce Banner shortly after college, but a wedge was driven between them when Bruce's work on recreating the Super Soldier Serum and his obsession with testing on himself resulted in him being transformed into the Hulk. However, when director of S.H.I.E.L.D. Nick Fury planned to use Wolverine to hunt down the Hulk and eliminate him, Betty Ross decided she had to do something. While she didn't have the rank or clearance to really interfere with the decision and the mission, and she was unable to convince the other heroes to help her, she took matters into her own hands by stealing a non-rage-inducing version of the Hulk formula made by Jennifer Walters. Betty took this formula herself in pursuit of the Hulk and Wolverine and was transformed into the She-Hulk. Number 1. Colossus. As with many other characters on our list, Colossus of the Ultimate Universe had a much more tragic upbringing than his 616 counterpart. On Earth 616, Colossus grew up on a collective farm in Russia, spending much of his spare time painting when not working on the farm, a talent he showed great affinity for. However, in the 1610 version of the character's origin, Colossus's Pyotr Rasputin fought in the Cold War, where the secret that he was a mutant was revealed to Anatol Spichkin. Spichkin promised Pyotr work should he ever need, and agreed to keep his secret. In this reality, Colossus's skin turns to steel, but it doesn't really come with super strength, so to work for Anatol he would take a drug known as Banshee to grant himself super strength to go along with his skin's durability. This Colossus is also gay, but spends most of his life in the closet in regards to this. When his father first found out, he was ashamed of Pyotr, and as such Pyotr has struggled most of his life, worried about the secret of his sexual orientation being revealed. His story is uplifting and empowering, and while different, is possibly even better than the 616 narrative for Colossus. Number 10. Ultra Woman. I love Susan Storm, do not get me wrong, and it's hard to find an alternate who really compares with the Invisible Woman, but I gotta say, I do really love the entire take on the Fantastic Four team in the 1977 What If series in issue number 6. In this issue, we look at what the team would be like if they received different powers. Instead of becoming invisible, Sue ends up with powers similar to the Earth 616, aka main continuity, Reed Richards. That is, she can stretch her body at will. While this might not seem as powerful in terms of her power set of, invisibility and what she's capable of on Earth 616, I kind of love these powers for her. Something I love in general about this team is the powers that they end up with are actually supposed to reflect more their personality than anything else. In other words, because Sue is flexible and versatile as a person and multifaceted, she ends up with these stretching and shapeshifting powers, which to me kind of makes a lot lot of sense. No one ends up invisible either on this team. And while I think Sue from Earth 616 is OP when it comes to her invisibility powers and everything she can do with them, I do think the Elassie abilities also suit her pretty well. Number 9. Alexander Luthor. Alexander Luthor only ranks so low on my list because he's technically an alternate of a villain, and in some cases, even the alternates that are Alexander Luthor are villains. But at the end of the day, the original Alexander Luthor Sr. of Earth 3, is a heroic alternate of villain Lex Luthor. And so for that reason, I still felt pretty fine including him on this list. Aside from the logistics of it, he's just super cool and in many ways is even more intelligent and in some depictions even more manipulative than Lex is. Alexander Luthor Sr., the original, did what he did for purely altruistic reasons. His son, less so. Alex Jr. became a major villain during Infinite Crisis. The New 52 version of Alexander Luthor was also more about heroics, albeit in his own way. Alexander Luthor hails from Earth 3 pretty much in all versions, where he sometimes is known as the main hero of that world who opposes the villainous crime syndicate. Even the rebooted version of the character from the New 52 returns to the character's somewhat more heroic roots, albeit, like I said, an Earth 3 twisted version of heroism where Alex will basically do whatever it takes to usurp the crime syndicate so that he can basically rule in their stead. This Alex is also revealed to be a secret ally of Superwoman, as he is her lover and the father of her child. She teams up with him when he faces off with the Injustice League, but tragically he loses that fight. Still, even there, Alex is insane as he can absorb the powers of the superhumans he defeats at that point with the power of Mazaz, which is kind of like, you know, the powers of Shazam. It's a whole thing. It's pretty cool. Or I guess maybe more like the powers of Black Adam, if you will. And friends, before we move on to this next spot, if you are loving this list and you are loving the content that we bring to you, do us a favor, head on over to Facebook, click that like, click that follow. It really does help us out here at the channel, and we have lots of cool, interesting content coming to you on Facebook, so yay! Number 8. Miles Morales. Okay, so hear me out. I'm not saying I don't like Peter, it's just that Peter has been around for a really long time when it comes to Spider-Man, and getting Miles via the Ultimate Universe was kind of like a breath of fresh air, honestly. Honestly, even having an alternate Peter in that universe in some ways was kind of refreshing, at least while he was alive. Except that there were still a lot of similarities between the two versions of those characters, between 616 Peter and 1610 Peter. Miles, on the other hand, has a different approach to being Spider-Man and a completely different personality. He doesn't tend to beat himself up as much either as Peter does. What I'm saying is, he's not much of a wallower, which I personally like a lot. And then let's just talk about powers when it comes to Miles. Miles has a lot of cool ones that Peter on Earth 616 doesn't have, which is also part of the reason why he's one of my favorite Spider-Men, period. In addition to his standard web-slinging, wall-crawling, proportional strength of a spider abilities, Miles also has camouflage powers and his powerful Venom Blast ability. Number 7. Allfather Thor. One of my favorite alternate versions of Thor would have to be Allfather Thor. This is because Allfather Thor basically stands to represent kind of like the end of Thor's journey, which is something we rarely get to see in comics, even when it comes to alternate realities. Allfather Thor represents what the end of Thor's story would be like, even beyond the life of humanity and Earth, which also gets explored. Also, let's talk about powerhouses. Everyone loves an alternate that could kick the OG version's butt, and when it comes to Allfather Thor, that is also true, even while missing an eye and an arm, by the way. Number 6. Death Metal Wonder Woman. Death Metal Wonder Woman might seem like she's part of the main continuity, and in terms of story, she kinda is, but in reality, she actually came out of a sort of reset or reality warp, if you will, of the multiverse. This all came about during Dark Knight's Death Metal. You see, initially at the beginning of that event, the heroes lost. However, they were promised if they would agree to basically like not cause trouble and just be chill, that they wouldn't be wiped from existence, but instead would be reshaped and given a place in this new world. Wonder Woman herself gets a really cool look and her Chainsaw of Truth, which uses the Lasso of Truth as a ripcord. So cool. Not only is Death Metal Wonder Woman a badass throughout this event, but she also looks the part too. And of course, even though she's allied with Batman Who Laughs at the beginning, she's like, haha, I'm definitely not gonna do that because I'm definitely gonna wanna change the universe back to how it was with the other heroes. Woo!
Number 5. Captain America. Time to get controversial. Alright, look, many people hate that the Ultimate Universe turned Captain America into a nationalist, someone who would cheat, and someone who could criticize France. That's not what 616 Captain America would do. It's true, but this ain't 616, this is 1610, and here, things are a little bit more realistic. Sorry. The guy who runs around with the stars and stripes being a bit of a jerk from time to time? Hardly the worst offense in this world. The writers may have cleverly tried to embed the mindset of a common white man of his era and time, and I think they achieved that, even if fans hated it. This version of Captain America, while also being a bit of a jerk, is actually superhuman, as opposed to being just a peak level human being, which has him perform some pretty awesome feats. This power boost mixed with the fact that he is very willing to cheat and bend the rules to get the job done, he is a powerful character and should be as feared as he is respected. Maybe he isn't better in terms of morals or being a great guy, but he's what a real Cap would probably be like in my cynical brain, and in terms of sheer strength and power, I think he most definitely is better. Number 4, Mr. Sinister. Look, his Ultimate Universe version may not have the wow factor that his 616 self might, but in the Ultimate X-Men arc, the Tempest, the sorta goofy looking Victorian geneticist in a Liberace collar, Mr. Sinister, is reimagined as a schizophrenic street thug with a white tank top, weird tattoos, and a hat. And he's gunning down mutants to please his Lord Apocalypse, who isn't actually real and is actually an effigy Sinister has constructed out of trash. 4 issues of the X-Men chasing down a delusional mutant murderer were some of the best from the X-Men extended run in the Ultimate Universe, in my opinion. Number 3, Magneto. The Ultimate Universe Magneto moves backwards away from the anti-hero crafted by Chris Claremont and back towards a return to the genocidal, aspiring dictator originally written by Stan Lee and Jack Kirby. And I'd say that he gets there quite successfully. In the first volume of Ultimate X-Men, Magneto attacks Washington DC with reprogrammed Sentinels, massacring civilians while having President George W. Bush stripped to nothingness groveling at his feet. He is utterly insane and completely terrifying, which could be seen as a negative by fans of his anti-hero persona, or, if you're like me, it's a giant win for a villain to be truly hateable and terrifying. Either way, this comes to its head in the divisive Ultimatum, where Magneto drowns New York City and kills dozens of heroes, including his old friend Professor X, when he reverses the polarity of the Earth in an insane show of power that sets the Ultimatum wave loose on the world. Number 2, Red Skull. In the Ultimate Universe, Steve Rogers and a girlfriend at the time, Gail Richards, shared a night together in 1945 before he went and got himself popsicled. 9 months later, out popped a baby that the government decided needed to be kept a secret. They took the boy into foster care on a military base, training him to become a super soldier to replace his father. He soon became stronger and more tactically skillful than Captain America, even though he seemed to be a perfect soldier. Rogers' son had been carefully planning his escape. Fast forward to 1963 when he was finally at the age of 17. The son went off the handle, de-lifing all the doctors and soldiers at the facility. He also used the kitchen knife to carve the skin from his head, officially and literally becoming the Red Skull. In rebellion against the system that created him, Red Skull was the one who planned President John F. Kennedy's send-off to the grave. He becomes a mentally unstable assassin and tries to eventually steal Reed Richards' plans for the Cosmic Cube in order to use it to change history so he could grow up with his father. It's just a way better backstory for a Red Skull, in my opinion. And at number 1, it is Peter Parker. For a lot of people, Brian Michael Bendis' legendary Ultimate Spider-Man run, the one that kicked off the whole Ultimate Universe, is among the best of the best Spider-Man runs ever. Peter Parker is a modern-day 15-year-old, still trying to balance his life as a teenager and his life as a superhero. What's different from this version when compared to the Amazing Spider-Man is that Peter Parker's life is much more relatable and digestible for anyone born in the past 25 years. For starters, Peter isn't a photographer when he first starts at the Daily Bugle. Being a tech-savvy teenager, our hero is one of the Daily Bugle's top web designers. J. Jonah Jameson also isn't a bumbling buffoon. He's a battle-tested, competent newspaper editor that's well aware of how to handle his staff. Spider-Man's interactions with other heroes are a bit more grounded in Ultimate Spider-Man, as well as his love life being much more entertaining and realistic. Whether it's Kitty Pryde or Mary Jane Watson, Peter Parker's love life never has a dull moment. Even Spider-Man's physical appearance makes more sense. Peter Parker has the build of a realistic nerdy teenager, and the costume's huge bug-eyed lenses make for the perfect representation of a youthful hero. And we haven't even mentioned his humor yet! One of the best scenes in any Spidey comic comes when Ultimate Spider-Man's version of the hero goes toe-to-toe with the Kingpin for the first time. During the battle, old Webhead pulls out note cards filled with bat jokes mocking Wilson Fisk's size. Like, come on, it's great.
Number 10, Maximus the Mad. I just like the look of Maximus the Mad here. We don't get to see too much of him or the other Inhumans, but what I like about him and them is kind of just that. They're more alluring when they're kept mysterious. Maximus, in case you didn't know, is the brother to Black Bolt. In the Earth 616 universe, he is known as Maximus the Mad, as I believe he's also known here. He is often depicted as such in terms of his appearance in the 616 continuity, and is also made to look somewhat more flamboyant in comparison to his Earth 1610, his Ultimate Universe counterpart. I do love that Maximus just looks like a normal dude in the Ultimate Universe, because also I just feel like just because you're mad doesn't mean you look different, you know what I mean? You just look normal. I think that actually makes him more frightening to me as well, that he just looks so normal, so average. Especially among the rest of the Inhumans, who all look pretty freaky, stand out, and honestly somewhat monstrous here. This more bleak take on the whole group in the Ultimate Universe makes me want to see a film version of them that was more of like a supernatural horror. Especially considering they consider Attilan to actually be like a heaven here, yet it's so dark. I believe based on this depiction, there could be promise in something like a supernatural horror film version of them. Number 9, Gregory Stark. Sorry Arno, move over, Gregory is here. I like Arno Stark, okay, but Gregory was a pretty cool villain to have, and he wasn't the secret brother of Iron Man either. Gregory is actually not just known, he's often more well liked than Tony is in the Ultimate Universe, at least initially. Tony is seen as being a bit of a loose cannon in comparison to his older twin brother, you see, who constantly has things way more together and is also super wicked smart. But that also works well for Gregory's character, as he also turns out to be, you guessed it, a bad guy. Of course, no one can be that good. We should have known. Gregory manipulated S.H.I.E.L.D. in order to get full control of it, and when all the pieces were in play, basically attempted to take over the world. He had to be taken out by Tony Stark, but in a much more permanent way than Tony when he dealt with Arno in the Earth 616 reality. Tony, in part, actually helped to kill his brother. He used an EMP to disrupt his nanites, which made Gregory critically vulnerable to an attack from Thor. Ouch. And friends, before we move on to this next spot, if you are loving this list, be sure to head on over to Facebook to show us some love, where you can give us a follow, a like, and check out all the cool content we have over there. Number 8, Crystal. I really love the original Crystal, especially in terms of her appearance, but I also do love the super rebellious vibes we get from Earth 1610 Ultimate Crystal in this narrative. Here, Crystal is still the little sister of Medusa, but this group of Inhumans, Medusa included, are even less likely to mingle with humans. They simply want to live a completely separate and simple life, which bothers Crystal, who it seems is searching for something more, something outside of her own family. Acting out, she runs away from her people, not eager to play the loyal member of the royal court, and not fond of her fiance, Black Bolt's brother, Maximus the Mad. Yeah, they're engaged in this reality. She runs into the Fantastic Four, and in so doing kind of reveals to them the secret location of Attilan as they pursue her after she is retrieved by her people. Crystal ends up deciding to stay with the Inhumans too, despite her unhappiness, which I also think is an interesting choice, and it gets me wanting to know more about both Crystal and the Inhumans in this universe. Cause like the Fantastic Four were also just like, you come chill with us, but she's like, nah, this is how it's gotta be, even though I definitely was not super here for this, but I still gotta stick with my fam. Number 7, Nick Fury. The Nick Fury of the Ultimate Universe Earth 1610 isn't perfect. In fact, he can kind of seem like he's being a butt a lot of the time, but in reality, it's just that Nick Fury often doesn't trust people. He keeps his plans and reasons behind them close to his chest, and while you might not understand them and therefore think he's callous, he's often just trying to make the hard call. Nick Fury has some flaws, I'll grant you, especially if we're talking about his relationship with his ex-wife and everything that apparently went wrong there. But this version of the character would become so beloved that he actually go on to inspire an Earth's 616 counterpart in Nick Fury Jr., and of course would inspire the version of the character we saw up on the big screen in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, where he was portrayed by the one and only Samuel L. Jackson. Samuel L. Jackson in fact also served as inspiration for the 1610 counterpart in the comics when it came to his appearance, and Mr. Jackson was actually the character's first pick, of course, when asked in canon who would be best to portray him in a film. Number 6. Black Bolt. Black Bolt is already menacing over on Earth 616, at least I would say in modern comics he is, but on Earth 1610 he is really menacing. We see Black Bolt for an even shorter time than Crystal, but honestly it only adds to the mystery of the character, making him appear more intimidating. The colors by June Chung during his appearance in Ultimate Fantastic Four Annual Issue Number 1 really help the character to pop as well, and the pencils by Jay Lee also add to the presence of his appearance. He might not say much, but he really doesn't need to here. This is a very muscular, dark, and yet blindingly bright Black Bolt with the white lines of his costume reminding me of lightning. Black Bolt simply appears basically to destroy Attilan so they might find a new secret home, as their current one in the Himalayas has been revealed to the FF, and you know, it's supposed to be secret. Aside from that, he also communicates how disappointed he is in Crystal. Honestly, I would not want this Black Bolt to be disappointed in me. I would be like walking on eggshells with him if he was like, I'm slightly disappointed in you, Amanda. Or you know, just stared at me and looked disappointed, because he couldn't really say that. He can only shout, well, he does shout to destroy Attilan, basically that he's disappointed, so there you go. Even the rebellious Crystal seems to be affected by Black Bolt's guilt tripping though, agreeing to remain with her people despite being offered a place among the humans and the Fantastic Four. I mean, he doesn't even shout to destroy Attilan. What am I saying? He like just says a word. That's also how powerful this version of him is. He's like, I'll just say a word, Crystal, your disappointment, and then it all just wipes away.
At number 5 is Beta Ray Bill. This guy is a very aggressive but also very respectable Thor variant. He sort of just butts into Thor's life and takes his title without even so much as a conversation first. It's sort of funny actually. They start as rivals and quickly become friends when they realize they pretty much match each other's power levels almost identically. Basically, Beta Ray Bill is a champion from his own world of Corbin, and when it's tragically destroyed by Searcher, he is forced to go on a pilgrimage to find a new home with a group of his own kind. And guess where they end up? They end up in the Milky Way. But as he's entering Thor's airspace, Thor decides it's kind of his duty to go and check in on the caravan with no intention to do any harm, just to check. But Thor's motivations are totally misunderstood by Beta Ray Bill, and he decides to launch a counterattack, thinking Thor is approaching aggressively. They both fight and the battle ends with actually a victory for Beta Ray Bill, who then promptly picks up Thor's hammer without issue. This comes as an absolute shock to Thor and everyone else because this has otherwise been an extremely uncommon occurrence up to this point. Thankfully for Thor, Odin rules that instead of offering Mjolnir to Beta Ray Bill, he would instead craft a whole new weapon for the Corbinite called Stormbreaker. After all this is settled, Beta Ray Bill actually ends up becoming a friend of Thor's and even steps in for the God of Thunder when he's out of town or out of commission. At number 4, we have Old King Thor. This version of the God of Thunder is basically an older, futuristic version of the 616 counterpart we're used to. Hailing from Earth 14412, this version of Thor is the All-Father and ruler of Asgard as we currently know Odin to be. His look is pretty intimidating, having a more advanced and seemingly fortified armor as well as only one eye. The eye is missing because similarly to his father, Odin, he too gave his eye in exchange for all the knowledge in the 9 realms. On top of all that, Old King Thor seems to have refined and perfected all of his abilities, meaning that it could be pretty easily argued that this version of Thor is in fact better than the original. In terms of power levels at least. And I think it's also always helpful for a hero to have more wisdom as well, which we can all safely say Old King Thor has in droves. I mean, just look at him. Although to be fair to Thor 616, it's sort of known that Old King Thor is just an older version of 616 Thor, even though he's from Earth 14412. Now, I'm not sure if Thor developed some ability to travel to other realities, but Old King Thor has suggested a few times before that if 616 Thor were to die, he would too. So there may not be any comparison since They're kind of the same dude, just one is a lot older and arguably more badass looking. At number 3 is Jane Foster. This version of Thor has one of the most intriguing backstories on the list. Jane Foster is just an average mortal from Earth 616 who basically discovers that she's capable of lifting Mjolnir. The way this happens is that Jane gets a job as a nurse and befriends Thor, who is in his human form, resembling a rather frail doctor named Donald Blake, but eventually he reveals his true identity to Jane as well as confessing his love for her. She then becomes the first mortal that has ever been brought to Asgard, but when she's endowed with Asgardian powers, she becomes overwhelmed by the responsibilities, and so Odin deems her not ready for the task, sending her back to Earth and wiping her memory. But once again, years down the line, she reunites with Donald Blake, aka Thor, and they fall in love once again, but only after a pretty rocky reunion. She's then tragically diagnosed with cancer, the illness that killed her mother when she was only 9 years old. And fast forwarding a bit, Thor is battling on Earth's moon when he realizes that he has lost his ability to wield Mjolnir, and when the hammer begins to call to Jane, she soon learns that she is meant to become the new Thor. The hammer seeks her out telepathically and she travels to find it on the moon. When she successfully lifts it, she transforms into a powerful goddess. Well, she transforms into Thor, and her health immediately increases as well as her physical appearance. She then goes on to be a really powerful and impressive version of Thor and even sacrifices herself at one point for Asgard, but is revived by Odin for her heroism. This is just such a cool and satisfying story of a Thor finding her way, starting as a mortal and becoming one of the most powerful gods in the cosmos. And despite all the bad hands dealt to her by life too. At number 2 we've got Thor-El, which you could maybe guess is basically a combination of Superman and Thor. One interesting thing about this guy off the bat is that he's blue. This is because when the two characters merge, Superman is in his blue energy form, and this merge that I mentioned is referring to the Ultimate Access crossover from the 90s. During this series, Marvel and DC laid down their feud to give fans a really interesting look into a world where Marvel and DC characters have both merged. And what a great combination to see merged into one, Superman and Thor. This is almost an unfair marriage of abilities, which makes probably one of the most powerful Thors on this list, actually arguably the most powerful, that is, if the number 1 spot on the list wasn't a thing. I know his accolades might not be the most extensive given the extremely short run of the character. In fact, he only really exists for about half an issue, but I really don't think the character should be written off due to his brevity. This list is about the value of a character in relation to the original Thor we're used to, and just adding Superman to an already powerful and extremely impressive hero, there's no question that this one has a leg up on Thor 616. At number 1, we've got Old Phoenix King Thor, or King Phoenix God of Fire. And if you're already pretty sure what this variant is all about, you're probably right, because the name is pretty self-explanatory. He's Old King Thor, having been overtaken by the Phoenix Force. In 2018's Thor Volume 5 Issue 6, Thor is facing off against Dr. Doom in a distant future, when he also encounters a Phoenix-possessed Wolverine, who is basically a walking, flaming adamantium skeleton at that point. And only when Wolverine reaches to grab Thor's hammer does he basically explode and disappear and pass on the Phoenix Force to Mjolnir, which just leaves Old King Thor and Dr. Doom to face off. But this isn't any ordinary Dr. Doom, it's a Dr. Doom endowed with the powers of the Iron Fist, Starbrand, Doctor Strange, and Ghost Rider all in one. And with the prosperity of Earth on the line, Old King Thor knows that he has to act fast not to end up overpowered by his supercharged Dr. Doom variant. So he makes the bold move of grabbing the hammer and allowing himself to be overtaken by Phoenix Force. With Old King Thor being one of the most powerful versions on the list, this variant instantly becomes hands down the most powerful we've ever seen. At number 10 we have Throg. This guy deserves a spot on the list mainly for the meme, but also because it's one of the iterations of Thor that doesn't take itself too seriously. For those who don't already know, this is obviously a trick played by Loki to humiliate his brother Thor. In Thor number 365, Throg makes his first appearance when Loki decides he wants to get a laugh out of his otherwise very serious and stoic brother. But this isn't the last time we see him. In an issue of What If that plays out if the X-Men stayed on Asgard, a Thorified version of Storm faces off against Throg for the glory of Asgard. which is pretty bonkers. I mean, you know how what ifs can be, right? It's definitely a bizarre moment that's probably meant for a laugh more than anything else. But believe it or not, this still isn't the last time Throg makes an appearance. We see him yet again in Lockjaw and the Pet Avengers #1 in 2009 alongside other animal versions of the Avengers. I guess readers just couldn't get enough of the little guy. He must have been rated pretty well because he just keeps coming back. He's funny looking. At number 9 we have Ultimate Thor. Being a pretty controversial set of comics, the Ultimate series sets the stage for some fun new characters, as uncanny and overly dark as they can sometimes be. But Thor's variant in the series is anything but a miss. Originally dismissed by his teammates on the Ultimates as being crazy, this version of Thor unusually feels the need to prove himself to them in order to gain their trust and respect as the God of Thunder. He's got almost the same powers as the Earth 616 Thor, but he's rocking a different look. That's pretty cool, and also a magical belt that he wears which seems to give him a boost of power. He also holds an axe instead of a hammer, which I just think is a pretty cool touch to have him stand out from his 616 counterpart. At number 8 we've got Thor 2099, where this world's Thor is actually a priest named Cecil McAdams, who is part of a religion devoted solely to the original Thor, who had lived 100 years before by this point. What's bizarre about this character is that he doesn't actually come by Thor's powers naturally. His abilities are granted to him by the CEO of the Alchemax Corporation, who has convinced him that he's a Norse god. It's actually a pretty dark reality playing out during the series, with most of the world being run by corporations and greedy multimillionaires. And on top of all that, genuine superheroes are pretty scarce during these times, unless they're created synthetically like McAdams is. Although it sounds like I'm basically just outing this guy as a fraud, he still means entirely well, and he's passionate about Norse mythology. What I find really cool about this character is that he's become a superhero through passion and obsession with the real Thor, which sort of turns him into a pretty genuinely powerful and motivated variant, especially since he fully believes he's the real deal. At number 7 is Thor Herald of Galactus. This one doesn't need much explanation for those who already know the role of the Herald of Galactus, but basically Galactus is this enormous cosmic being that has an insatiable hunger for planets. So he goes around consuming them with absolutely zero remorse. But even a being as gigantic and powerful as Galactus needs some help to get his destructive work done. So he always has someone called a Herald that helps guide him through the cosmos and find the next planets for him to consume. In exchange, the Heralds are granted ownership over the power cosmic, which basically gives them a fraction of Galactus' power, which even a fraction is a ton if you know Galactus. With the power cosmic, the Herald is then able to travel at immeasurable speeds through the cosmos and harness almost limitless power in order to fulfill their duties. And at one point, Thor is chosen as the next Herald. His costume changes to something much darker and even cooler in some ways, and also if you imagine Thor's powers paired with the effects of the aforementioned power cosmic, then you can also imagine why this variant deserved a spot on this list in terms of power as well.
Number 6, Spider-Man Noir. Listen here, see? After seeking out sweet vengeance on the criminal known as the Goblin for taking away the life of his Uncle Ben, our young hero Peter Parker goes off to a warehouse to do some investigating. Turns out that there is a spider idol in this warehouse containing thousands of spiders. Once the idol is broken, one of these spiders bites Peter, prompting an incredibly real version of a spider god, who seemingly grants the abilities of a human spider on our hero. He is granted most of the same powers as regular Spider-Man, with a bit less strength and a stronger healing factor. He also gains the ability to use organic webbing, which can be gross, but in this time it's cool. Spider-Man Noir may not be the most powerful alternate spider. There are plenty of others who have added abilities, but he has the power of popularity on his side, not to mention a killer look and story that makes him a fan favorite character ever since his introduction. Number 5, Spider-Man 2099. Instead of getting bitten by a radioactive super spider, Miguel O'Hara's DNA was biologically mixed with a spider's DNA to save his life after he was forcibly hooked on a not far off future substance by his employer. If that sounds convoluted, well, yeah, it is. But it also sounds right at home in a comic book. Although the process of gaining his powers differed from Peter Parker, Miguel was still granted some of the same abilities at a pretty similar level. One thing that differs largely is Miguel's spider sense. He doesn't have one. Instead, Miguel has advanced super senses similar to someone like Daredevil. Miguel also has some abilities that are just wholly unique to him. For example, he possesses possesses an incredible level of super speed, as well as telepathic communication abilities, both of which are really cool. He also has fangs and claws on his fingers and toes that he can use in combat, which is still cool, but a little bit freaky. On top of all those powers though, Miguel is from the year 2099, which obviously means that he naturally has a much more advanced set of technology at his disposal. But it's not just his powers and technology that make him better. The Spider-Man 2099 story is awesome, but you'll have to do the necessary reading to figure that out for yourself. Number 4, Mayday Parker. First appearing in a What If number 105 from December 1997, Mayday Parker is the daughter of Peter Parker and Mary Jane from a future alternate world. Coming from Earth 982, Mayday Parker becomes Spider-Girl and eventually Spider-Woman, filling in the role that her father once held. Where she is only slightly weaker than Peter in the strength department, she is much more agile, which I didn't even know was possible. Mayday also has a stronger, more precise spider sense, but on top of those advancements, her ability to stick to surfaces is considerably more powerful than Peter's and is actually pretty unique. Wall crawling does not come as naturally to May, and she has to concentrate to stick to surfaces, but she also has the ability to transmit her electrostatic stickiness through surfaces, making everyone and everything else stick to that surface, which is just nuts. What's even cooler is that she can reverse the ability, and instead of stick, she can repel. This adds power to her jumps, but can also be used to repel even people and objects away from her at speed. Mayday is awesome, and I can't wait to see what Marvel does with her going forward. Number 3, Ghost Spider. Spider-Gwen, or Ghost Spider, is Gwen Stacy, Peter Parker's first love interest, but from the alternate reality of Earth 65. In this reality, Gwen Stacy is bitten by the spider, granting her powers and keeping Peter Parker as some nerd, but also her initial love interest. Gwen was granted superhuman strength, speed, toughened flesh, and pretty much all the spider-based powers that the regular Spider-Man would possess. Where she differs in a pretty big way is that after Gwen was depowered, she instead successfully bonded with the Venom symbiote. Gwen learned to find a very healthy balance with her symbiote. When she first bonded with Venom, thanks to a Matt Murdock version of Kingpin, she was rage-fueled and looking for revenge, but over time she realized that she needed to control that and give Venom better qualities to enhance in order to find balance with the symbiote. So in a way, Venom and Gwen became even greater heroes, helping each other out. Number 2, Miles Morales. Following the passing of Peter Parker in Marvel's Ultimate Universe, Miles Morales was bitten by an enhanced spider that caused him to pass out and foam at the mouth. When he awoke though, he discovered he had superpowers, and that's pretty cool. Taking on the role of the new Spider-Man, Miles is one of the only characters to fully inhabit the Spider-Man mantle with almost complete support from the fans. Miles Morales is an incredible character. He has his own villains and interpersonal connections to make him wholly his own, but having the Spider-Man name also pulls him into contact with many mainstays of the Spider-Man mythos. He has almost all of the regular Spider abilities, plus some amazing powers unique to himself, like his Venom, which is like a form of bioelectricity that he can emit from his body. Miles is also able to use a spider camouflage to make his whole body go invisible. Miles was so popular that his character got pulled over to the main Marvel universe after Secret Wars, making him one of the few surviving characters from the Ultimate Universe. And finally, in at number 1 today, it's Ultimate Spider-Man. Speaking of the Ultimate Universe, I think it's only fair to talk about that universe's Peter Parker. The Ultimate Spider-Man comic run is considered by a lot of people to be one of the absolute best Spider-Man runs ever. Being one of the best things to come from writer Brian Michael Bendis, Ultimate Spider-Man revamped the origin of the Spider-Man character for modern audiences in the 2000s, but also made Peter Parker even younger. The story follows the original story pretty closely, with only minor tweaks and changes that make it even better or more digestible for younger audiences, like the fixes made to the Clone Saga story or even the changes made to the Venom symbiote. The Earth 1610 comic book run had one writer at the helm, which really helped to maintain consistency throughout the story, whereas Earth 616's Amazing Spider-Man carried on for 50 years and had many writers coming in to build the story, unfortunately giving it areas that lacked to some degree. Ultimate Spider-Man took a great idea and then ran with it, building up an incredible cast of characters and injecting a great deal of emotion and heart into the story as it took familiar ideas in bold new directions. That's why Ultimate Spider-Man is the #1 spot for Spider-Man Alternates who can even attempt to be better than the original.
Number 10, Ironheart. better than Iron Man. Okay, hear me out on this one. Riri Williams is a teenage superhero genius who was able to reverse engineer an Iron Man suit by looking at Tony Stark's suit. Tony was impressed with her work and drafted her to fight alongside him in the second Marvel Civil War against Captain Marvel's forces. By the end of the war, Tony was in a coma and Riri was made Ironheart, Iron Man's successor. She used an AI of Tony to help her with the learning curve, but eventually replaced him with an AI of her own design. In her time as a superhero, she has managed to defeat a variety of supervillains and has shown herself to be close to, if not equal to, Tony Stark in raw intelligence. But why is she better? Well, it honestly has less to do with her and more to do with Tony. The original Iron Man has made a series of blunders over the years, such as forming the Illuminati, which led to an angry Hulk taking over New York. He was directly involved in starting not one but two civil wars, one of which resulted in the Avengers being disbanded and unable to prevent the Skrull invasion. He was in charge of S.H.I.E.L.D. but screwed up so hard that Norman Osborn was put in charge of national security, and he turned himself into a god and killed all of his friends after going crazy. Riri Williams is the better superhero simply because she hasn't had multiple instances of nearly destroying the world in her efforts to make it better. Number 9. Blue Beetle just keeps getting better. The original Blue Beetle was Daniel Garrett, an archaeologist who discovered a powerful artifact called the Blue Scarab. It bonded to Dan and gave him superpowers such as flight, super strength, and energy projection. He became the first Blue Beetle, but one of Dan's students, Ted Kord, took over the mantle when Dan was killed in action while trying to stop Ted's evil uncle from taking over the world. Ted couldn't get the scarab to work for him and decided to instead train himself to his physical peak and use his skills as an inventor to create vehicles and gadgets that would help him fight crime. He operated as a hero in the DC universe for years, being a member of such teams as the Birds of Prey and the Justice League until he was killed in action by the villain Maxwell Lord. The mantle of Blue Beetle survived, with the third Blue Beetle, a teenager named Jaime Reyes, finding the scarab that granted the first Blue Beetle his powers. It fused itself to his spine and gave him the abilities of flight, super strength, mechanokinesis, metamorphosis, as well as access to sound, energy, and fire manipulation weapons. Not only is he the coolest looking of the three Beetles, he is by far the most powerful, and he only gets more powerful as Jaime gets more experience as a hero. Number 8. The new Superman does what the original can't. The son of Lois Lane and Clark Kent, Jonathan Samuel Kent has been a superhero since an early age, becoming Superboy when he was 10 years old. After an incident involving a black hole, he was imprisoned by the villain Ultraman for several years before he escaped and returned to Earth. Although it had been years for him, it had only been a few weeks on Earth. The now 17-year-old was tasked by his father with protecting Earth while he went away to deal with an extraterrestrial threat, and John became the new Superman. Although one might assume that as someone who's half human and half Kryptonian, he would be weaker than a full Kryptonian, tests that were run on him before his birth by Batman revealed that his unique physiology would actually be an advantage, giving him the potential to be even more powerful than the original Man of Steel. Another way that he has more power than Kal-El is his ability to become involved in Earth's issues. As the original Superman explained to his son in Superman, Son of Kal-El #2, the reason he had refrained from involving himself more in many of Earth's issues and conflicts was that as an alien born on Krypton, he didn't feel he had the right to impose his beliefs on the people of Earth and should instead lead by example. He went on to say that as someone who was born on Earth, John could involve himself more and end up having more of a positive effect on Earth than even the original Superman. Number 7. Dick Grayson crushed it as Batman. The original Batman is one of the most beloved superheroes of all time, having used his massive brain and fortune to become the world's greatest detective and one of the world's greatest martial artists. When a young boy named Dick Grayson's parents were killed, Bruce adopted him and made him the first Robin. All of Dick's childhood was dedicated to training him to be an even better hero than Batman and to perhaps one day take over the mantle. Dick eventually became the hero Nightwing, but when Bruce was presumed dead, it became clear that a new Batman had to take his place. Several people fought over the cowl, such as Tim Drake and Jason Todd, but in the end, Dick became the new Batman and took on Bruce's troubled son Damian as his Robin. Not only did Dick manage to live up to the mantle and keep Gotham safe, in some ways he was actually a better Batman than Bruce. He had a healthier relationship with the GCPD, where they were more comfortable around him and willing to work with him. He was able to take Damian under his wing in a way that Bruce struggled to match, and he was more open to collaboration with other heroes and members of the Bat family, something Bruce constantly struggles to do, resulting in him causing issues for everyone. When Bruce returned, he was so impressed with Dick's work that he asked him to stay on as Batman to protect Gotham while he worked on establishing Batman Inc. Although he has since gone back to being Nightwing, it's no wonder Batman considers Dick Grayson his greatest accomplishment.
Number 6. House of M's Spider-Man. So this version of Peter Parker, like a lot of other people in the House of M reality, actually had a better life, at least in the beginning. He stopped the robber who would have taken his Uncle Ben's life, so Uncle Ben is still alive, and the two created a version of Parker Industries. Since he stopped the robber, he also had a lucrative career as a wrestler, and then he became a very successful actor, even working with Mary Jane Watson, helping to make her a star actress. Gwen Stacy also never passed away, so Peter and her married and had a child together. The problems really come for this Spider-Man when the mutant-human war finally began. Peter, being so famous as a superhero, was immediately accused of being a mutant, but under the guidance of his Uncle Ben, Peter went along with it, pretending to be a mutant, becoming an idol for mutant children everywhere. A false idol though. It was only a matter of time before he was found out, and then he came under public fire for misrepresenting himself as a mutant for years. A movie he starred in about his life was pulled from theaters, stock in his business began to tank, his family members were forced to seclude themselves in their estate, and the conflict became so bad Peter had to fake his own passing and go into hiding. Number 5. Tom. I remember when I learned that the new Spider-Man who would be swinging into the MCU would be Tom Holland, and while at first I think I and a lot of people were skeptical of anyone who would step into the role of Marvel's #1 hero, Tom really killed it. Coming in for the first time in the MCU's Civil War, not only did we get the coolest intro to Peter himself with Robert Downey Jr.'s Iron Man, but then the guy shows up at the airport battle and the first thing he does is steal Captain America's shield. And then he proceeds to make Falcon and the Winter Soldier look like complete chumps. But then we got a whole trilogy of films, each one knocking it out of the park, and almost followed a backwards approach to the films before it, giving us Peter living life in high school for 2 whole movies before he finally comes into his own at the end of the 3rd film, and now the character can go literally anywhere. I just want to know what's gonna happen next. In at number 4, Andrew. The second person to bring Spider-Man to the big screen, Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man movies were a mixed bag. Some people were not as much of a fan of the Sony-backed films themselves, but almost no one I know had a complaint against Andrew himself or the way he played Spider-Man. Of the actors to play the wall crawler, I think this Spider-Man had some of the best quips, and he also looked freaking sweet. The chemistry between Peter and Gwen Stacy was also incredibly real feeling, which made it all the more emotionally devastating when Peter lost her. The villains of this version of Peter also had a much more genuine connection to the hero than the MCU version of the character. We got to see him create his own web shooters, unlike either of the other live action versions, showing us how smart he actually is, and this version of Peter was a much more believable and likable oddball. If you ask me, the first movie was better than the second, but man, I wish we got a 3rd movie. Number 3, Tobey. If we're gonna talk about Tom and Andrew, we need to talk about the first one to bring it all to the screen, Tobey Maguire. This version of Spider-Man, and honestly his supporting cast, all gave a life to the character and characters of the Spider-Man mythos that we had never seen before. Peter in this universe is much more dorky. Like, you really believe that this guy is a big old nerd turned superhero, but it also makes him incredibly likable when coupled with how much of a genuine hero he actually is. Not only that, but his connection with Uncle Ben and Aunt May was probably the most real of any live action adaptation, which made it so much more real when Peter lost his uncle. The other thing with the original trilogy of Spider-Man movies is that Peter struggled. His character was constantly trying to make money or keep his relationships afloat, he was struggling to pay rent, and he was taking care of Aunt May, all while trying to balance being a web-swinging superhero who was constantly losing his powers and dealing with his idols always becoming some of the best supervillains to come to movies. Well, at least in the first 2 movies. Also, we got Bully Maguire, and that's really cool. So, number 2, Pavitr Prabhakar. Pavitr Prabhakar first came to us in Spider-Man India #1 back in January of 2005, and man, is he awesome. As a young poor kid, Pavitr went to live with his Uncle Bim and Aunt Maya in Mumbai. Pavitr was bullied on the regs, and while being chased by other kids one day, he came into contact with an ancient yogi who ended up giving him the power of a spider to fight against evil. While figuring out his powers, Pavitr refused to help a woman being attacked by several men, and this led to the passing of his Uncle Bim at the hands of those men, since Bim tried to help her when Spider Spider-Man wouldn't. And just like that, as with all Spider-Men, Peter learned that with great power comes great responsibility. His powers, weaknesses, and pretty much everything else are very similar to Earth 616 Spider-Man, but usually with a bit of a mystical twist given the way in which he received his powers. He has faced villains like Nalan Oberoi, a crime lord who used an amulet to get demonic powers, and Dr. Octopus, who had demon arms that were given to him by Nalan. In the Spider-Verse, he battled alongside Superior Spider-Man, Spider-Man UK, and all his other alternates as one of the best of the bunch. Finally, in at number 1, Ben Reilly. Technically, just like Superior Spider-Man, this alternate Spider-Man isn't an alternate Spider-Man at all. Ben Reilly is a Peter Parker clone from the 616 continuity, but don't think that makes him any less awesome. Ben has all the same powers as Spider-Man with a much darker story. As Scarlet Spider, Ben was a favorite among fans, even outshining Spider-Man himself on a few occasions, but he has gone through so many twists and turns throughout his time. So after being created by a villain known as the Jackal, Ben would be defeated, but in secret he would go into hiding for 5 years, returning to New York as the Scarlet Spider. Ben even stepped into the role of Spider-Man himself during a brief period of time, and at the end of that arc, Ben would lose his life, only to be resurrected and then taken to the afterlife over and over and over again by his creator. This drove him completely insane, driving him to overthrow his creator and become the new Jackal. He eventually went back to being the Scarlet Spider, became Spider-Man again, and now he is the totally awesome Chasm.
Number 10, Jessica Drew. Jessica Drew is very different from her 616 counterpart. Now, while I personally prefer the 616 Jessica Drew as she is one of my favorite Spider people of all time, I can understand why others might find the ultimate version of the character more intriguing. This version of Jessica Drew is not her own person. Quite the opposite. She is in fact a female clone of Peter Parker. She shares Peter's memories and even his feelings, which means that she too cares for Mary Jane as Peter did. She was created to be used as a weapon by the CIA, but before they could wipe her mind to clear out all of Peter's memories, which she shared, she and the fellow clones who were created alongside her escaped. With all the other clones also sharing Peter's memories, Jessica attempted to dissuade them from interfering in Peter's life, but ultimately failed in this regard. In the end, she would team up with Spider-Man to help him try and find Mary Jane, who it turned out had been kidnapped by Kane, another of Peter's clones, whose ultimate self was also known as the imperfect or flawed clone, just as he is in 616. Number 9, Carol Danvers. Alas, this Carol Danvers doesn't have powers, like her 616 counterpart Captain Marvel, formerly known as Miss Marvel, does, but that doesn't make Carol any less awesome here. In fact, some would likely believe that the character actually might be improved without her cosmic abilities and her Kree heritage. This Carol Danvers is a high-ranking S.H.I.E.L.D. agent who would actually go on to become a replacement to the director of S.H.I.E.L.D., Nick Fury. To me, she embodies a lot of the military and tactical elements of Carol and possibly highlights those even more. Although sadly, she's not a pilot like Carol is on Earth 616. Carol would go on to lead the New Ultimates, and after her time with S.H.I.E.L.D. would actually become the chief of staff for the president, initially serving President Howard and afterwards greatly helping Steve Rogers, aka Captain America, when he became president thereafter. And friends, before we move on to the next spot, if you are loving our content here on Top 10 Nerd on YouTube, be sure to check us out over on Facebook, where we have lots of other content coming your way, and we're also gonna have lots of cool different stuff, so be sure to check it out. Number 8, Galactus. While Galactus is an iconic antagonist on Earth 616, the unique take on the often supervillain and supremely powerful cosmic being was a refreshing one. Here, Galactus was still a global threat, but as opposed to being a giant cosmically powered man who can sometimes, let's be honest, be reasoned with and defeated that way, this version of the villain was a group of deadly drones that were less easily reasoned with. After coming to the reality of Earth 616, this group of drones, which once threatened the Earth of the Ultimate Universe, threatened instead the whole universe of Earth 1610 when they met and merged with the Galactus of the main continuity. Galactus of Earth 616 decided to make the Galactus his heralds, resulting in a deadly combination. Number 7, the Liberators. The Liberators are basically a more politically inspired version of of the Masters of Evil, a more serious take on that villainous group. They're made up from heroes of various international rival nations who basically seek to destroy the Ultimates because they feel the US has an unfair advantage and needs to be put in their place. The crazy part is that a lot of their beef feels pretty justified and serves to expose some of the flaws in American nationalism throughout the story involving them, despite those like Captain America and the Ultimates being the heroes of that story, while the Liberators are still technically very much the villains.
At number 6, Planet X Rogue. The version of Rogue we get in Uncanny Avengers is probably the most powerful Rogue we've ever seen, and yes, that includes the countless versions of her imbued with the Phoenix Force. After taking a fatal blow that led me to believe that she expired for like half a dozen issues, she played a crucial role in thwarting off a celestial attack by absorbing the powers of every X-Men and Avenger available. We're talking hundreds of superheroes here, imbuing her with what's basically every superpower at once. And these powers ain't from lackluster players either. We've got some big names here like the Hulk and Wonder Man, just to name a couple. She becomes so insanely powerful that she's able to single-handedly slow Exitar's descent to Earth by pushing up against the bottom of his foot, and when Death Sentry held the other foot, Exitar was halted completely. Like, come on, you don't think that's epic? Sure, she couldn't stop him on her own, but come on, this dude is big enough to size up our entire planet, for crying out loud. His shoe size is bigger than Rhode Island. Need I go on? At number 5 is Bloodstorm. This version of Storm from an alternate reality is very similar to her canonical 616 counterpart, save for the fact that she was captured by Count Dracula in an attempt to turn her into his bride. And after becoming the vampiric Bloodstorm, she easily overthrew the Count and helped the X-Men defeat him. However, she ultimately decided not to return to the X-Men on account of her vampirism. She was later imprisoned by some of Dracula's disciples, and while attempting to escape, Monroe was confronted by one of her former teammates, Kitty Pryde, who attacked Bloodstorm as she'd rather see her friend perish than be a vampire. But Kitty hesitated at the last second, falling prey to Bloodstorm as her first victim. There's also a Bloodstorm from an alternate reality in which she was captured by Dracula first before joining the X-Men, where her bloodlust sadly overpowered her, resulting in her taking a big ol' bite of at least both Beast and Professor X. This reality's weather-controlling vampire proves without a doubt that sometimes the best way to improve a character is by adding fangs. At number 4 is Belasco, and no, I'm not talking about the supervillain. I'm talking about the X-Man who became the supervillain in an alternate timeline, that X-Man being Nightcrawler. And if that sounds a bit convoluted, you ain't heard of nothing yet. You see, the events of this timeline closely resemble that of Earth 616. That is until Nightcrawler loses his arm in battle and is forced to teleport to safety. Unfortunately for him, thanks to some Terrigen mist, some weird opposite day stuff is going on as he finds that everyone in the town he's transported himself to are mutants, whereas conversely the Nightcrawler seemed to be stripped of all his mutant powers and appearance, making him stand out as a regular dude among thousands of mutants. Yeah, for once it would have actually paid for Kurt to be blue. Kurt was attacked and slain by the people of the village for being different, because even though everything's different, nothing's really changed. Now, moments away from his own demise, Kurt was approached by the demonic Mephisto, who empowered that bitter voice deep down in Kurt's heart, which always tempted him to believe that those hateful and fearful beings he was sworn to protect were not worth the effort. Now imbued with a deep thirst for revenge against the world for treating him like the monster he appeared to be, Kurt was transformed into a demonic entity imbued with demonic powers and false memories that would perpetuate his unrelenting hatred, and manifesting the spitting image of Belasco, the X-Men's former nemesis. In fact, it was revealed that the Nightcrawler had actually been this reality's Belasco all along, thanks in part to a time loop set in motion by Captain America, who refused to deal with Mephisto and some time travel shenanigans. It's even hinted that Belasco's frequent targeting of the X-Men over the years is actually a subconscious cry for help. So this version of Nightcrawler makes for the perfect evil counterpart, as this pure-hearted X-Men had been compensating for his monstrous appearance with genuine kindness and optimism, doing his best to protect the world that hated him. Yet thanks to Mephisto, Kurt was forced into becoming the very thing he feared the most. At number 3 is Death. What do you get when you merge Wolverine with the Horsemen of the Apocalypse? You get the Eternal Rest itself. During an Avengers event which saw Kang damage the time stream, something he's prone to do at this point, the Avengers were faced with Apocalypse and his 4 horsemen, all of whom bearing uncannily resemblances to our favorite superheroes. We've got a demonic-looking 8-armed, 4-legged Spider-Man as our first horseman, Red Hulk as the Horseman of War, Scarlet Witch with the Black Horse, and finally Wolverine, the Horseman of Eternal Rest. And as for what makes this Wolverine special, aside from the fact that he's permanently fused with a floating horse, is the fact that Wolverine now embodies the very entropy of the universe itself. Well, that is, if he didn't already. At number 2 is the Witness. This alternate reality version of Gambit is himself a temporal anomaly existing at the junction where all timelines converge, thus allowing the Witness to exist at all points in time at once, enabling to perceive everything before it happens, and making for one of the coolest X-Men in the multiverse. Now, being the anomaly that he is, much of his origin is shrouded in mystery. In fact, when Bishop was tasked with gathering as much info on the dude as he could, the only clue we got was him saying, "I am LeBeau." And more than LeBeau, which is about as cryptic as you can get. Now, upon deeper investigation, I discovered that while many assumed the Witness to be an elderly Rami LeBeau, otherwise known as Gambit, it was revealed in the X-Men Future History Messiah War sourcebook, holy cow, what a mouthful, that the Witness was actually a different person altogether, a conclusion that I personally reject. I mean, come on, you're telling me that the Witness, the last guy to ever see the X-Men alive, whose name is LeBeau, isn't actually Gambit? Like, they both even shared the same Cajun accent, for crying out loud. Now, this could be explained by a flashback where we see a 6-year-old Remy running into the Witness by chance, who became somewhat of Remy's mentor. But that doesn't really eliminate the possibility of these two being one and the same, since the Witness is a time traveler after all. There's also that time in Gambit issue number 10 when Gambit is on their hunt for a special jewel with temporal properties, an artifact which is revealed to be sent to Gambit backwards through time by the Witness himself. Bishop at one point even refers to the Witness as Gambit to his face, a name that the Witness does not deny owning, instead simply replying by calling Bishop Mon Ami. And if you're still not happy with my anti-canonical reasoning, too bad. At number 1, we have the Rex Dogs. If you've got a problem, let me remind you that this list calls for better X-Men, and if you believe that the universe where anthropomorphic canines exist in the place of humans is somehow inferior to the X-Men, then you must be a cat person. You see, the Rex Dogs are leagues better than their human counterparts on numerous fronts. Firstly, the original X-Men are prone to fight amongst themselves, like how Wolverine and Cyclops stick together about as well as two repelling magnets, whereas the Rex Dogs take loyalty to a whole new level. In terms of combat, the X-Men are strictly known for their heroic accomplishments, while on the other hand, not only are the Rex Dogs unafraid of getting their paws dirty, they're also adorable while doing it. Guys, let's face it, it's hard not to love these mutant doggies. The only thing that the X-Men have on the Rex Dogs is opposable thumbs, which are definitely overrated. I mean, come on, Professor Rex is a disabled telepathic chihuahua, for crying out loud. From vampires to puppies, these mutants prove that sometimes the best way to improve a character is with a few unexpected twists. Of course, we still have the classic X-Men, flaws and all, but it's always fun to imagine what could have been with these alternate reality versions.
In at 10, T'Challa. In the year 1988, within the hidden nation of Wakanda, T'Chaka, the ruler, cautions his young son T'Challa against venturing beyond their borders, emphasizing the suffering and devastation that exists in the outside world. However, driven by curiosity, T'Challa defies his father's advice one night and ventures to the outskirts of Wakanda. Unbeknownst to him though, the powerful force field that conceals the nation attracts the attention of Yondu Onoda's subordinates, who mistakenly abduct T'Challa due to the cosmic energy emanating from Wakanda's vibranium meteorite. In space, Yondu then reprimands his crew for snatching the wrong person, but decides to welcome T'Challa nonetheless, recognizing his adventurous spirit. Impressed by T'Challa's exploratory nature, Yondu extends an invitation to join the Ravagers and explore the vast expanse of the galaxy. Fast forward 20 years, where T'Challa, now known as Star-Lord, successfully retrieves the orb from its chamber. However, his actions draw the attention of Korra the Pursuer and two Sakarans who are sent by Roman the Accuser to get the artifact. This is just it's from an episode of What If, you know, the MCU animated series on Disney Plus. So if you want the full story along with Thanos and the rest, be sure you watch that episode because it's good, pretty good. In at 9, Guardians 3000. As the ruler of the dwindling Spartax Empire, Star-Lord of Earth 691 found himself leading the remnants of his war fleet. In a critical turn of events, he was summoned by the Guardians of the Galaxy along with the remaining leaders of the Galactic Council to address a grave situation. This involved the human Gina Drake and a temporal anomaly that reset their family, returning them to the beginning of a war they had previously won. Amidst a unexpected ambush orchestrated by the Brotherhood of the Badoon, Star-Lord courageously fought alongside his fellow Guardians, determined to create an opening for their escape. United by their mission, they braved the chaos and danger together, striving to overcome the odds and protecting their cause. He has a pistol capable of conjuring one of the 4 elements, and Peter Quill of This Earth has also mentioned that he inherited his armor, element, gun, and ship when he became Star-Lord. So it could mean that this is isn't really an alternate version of Star-Lord, but rather his descendant. Gina Drake also suggests it as they meet Earth 616 Star-Lord, and it's revealed in Guardians 3000 number 6 that Peter was born on Spartax in 2985. And at 8, Red Rain. Batman investigates a series of gruesome murders in Gotham City, only to discover that the killer is none other than Dracula, the legendary vampire. Batman teams up with a rogue vampire named Tanya to stop Dracula and his brood from terrorizing the city, but in the course of it, Batman actually makes Tanya turn him. Yeah, he becomes a vampire to fight the vampires. Tanya then provides Batman with a blood substitute to spare him from the cycle of death and murder that comes with being bitten by a vampire, but in order to destroy Dracula's minions, Batman lures them into the Batcave, where Tanya and her followers engage them in combat. Batman detonates multiple explosives, destroying Wayne Manor and exposing the cave to sunlight, which ultimately kills all the vampires inside it. Batman then confronts Dracula himself and impales the Vampire Lord on a tree that had been struck by lightning. This act, however, comes at the cost of Batman's humanity, as Dracula drained the last of his blood. Nevertheless, Batman assured Alfred that he has nothing to fear, as the Batman, with his new literally vampiric powers, will live on forever. The most Batman version on this list, if I'm honest. And at 7, Gotham by Gaslight. Gotham by Gaslight is about 19th century Bruce Wayne recalling the killing of his parents as a child. Consulting with Dr. Sigmund Freud, yes that one, about the dreams he's had about the deaths of his parents and significantly bats, he then returns to Gotham City to become Batman and fight crime. The Gotham press begins to circulate the news of the Batman and soon links his appearance to a series of women found killed throughout the city. The identity of the killer is announced by Commissioner Tolliver to be Jack the Ripper. Eventually, Bruce is accused of the murders and sentenced to be and is imprisoned at Arkham Asylum. But with the help of Alfred, he escapes, dons the Batsuit, and stops Jack the Ripper, who is revealed to be Jacob Packer. Jacob then also confesses to causing the deaths of Thomas and Martha and framing Bruce in revenge for Martha's rejection. The comic was a one-shot from January of 1990, but became a fan favorite and is quite the interesting and dark tale, because Batman fighting Jack the Ripper, that's kinda dope. And at 6, Dark Claw. Logan Wayne is a combination of obviously Bruce Wayne and Logan, being first introduced in Marvel vs. DC number 3. At 5 years old, after witnessing his parents' killing at the hands of an armed robber, Logan Wayne was sent to live with his uncle in Alberta, Canada. His uncle was a member of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police and was ambushed and murdered by poachers a short time after his arrival in Canada. After the death of his uncle, Logan then went to live in a home run by nuns, and as soon as he was old enough, he enlisted in the Royal Canadian Air Force. Logan was submitted to the Weapon X Project, the Canadian Super Soldier program, and it was here where Logan had adamantium bonded to his bones and learned of his metamutant nature. The Weapon X Project was terminated due to its dual failure. Logan was ineffective as a weapon because he possessed a conscience, but this didn't stop him from being pretty damn badass. Having all the powers of Logan, as well as things like the Clawcopter and Clawmobile, I'm not even kidding, those are actually things, this is essentially a superpowered Batman, and I think that that's something we all wanted. Plus, Dark Claw, that's a great freaking name, dude. That's dope. That's terrifying. Halfway through, in at number 5, Red Sun. Imagine, if you will, Batman being a force for Mother Russia. The Batman of this story was born to a pair of dissidents who were later killed by Stalin's police force. He vowed to seek vengeance against Fyodor Roslov, the captain of the police force. After 20 years, he became the most wanted man in the Soviet Union and continuously challenged the authorities, executing acts of terror against Superman's regime and evading Roslov's police force skillfully. I couldn't help it. Just that name kind of makes you have to go into that accent. The people revered him as a legend, impossible to kill, and the ghost of killed dissidents. Roslov convinced Batman to team up with him and eliminate Superman, arguing that with Superman out of the way, Batman's vendetta against Roslov would be easier. Batman agreed and kidnapped Wonder Woman, using her lasso to draw Superman into a wasteland where he bombarded him with simulated red sunlight, and Batman intended to lock Superman away in a cellar, but Wonder Woman destroyed her lasso and the generator powering the lamps, which freed Superman. Batman then offed himself by detonating a bomb that was inside of his body to avoid being lobotomized and locked up, because of course that's gonna happen. In at 4, Batman the Merciless. When Ares, the Greek god of war, created a helmet that amplified his powers 100-fold, war broke out in an effort to stop him. For 2 years, Batman and Wonder Woman fought side by side to get close enough to attempt to stop the god. It was during this war that Bruce and Diana fell in love with each other. They and their allies made a pledge to kill the god of war in order to end his reign of terror once and for all, and as they finally mounted an attack to kill Ares, the two were able to get the helmet off the god of war. However, Diana was incapacitated, causing Batman to believe that she had died. Driven by grief, Bruce put on the helmet of the god of war to defeat Ares, despite being warned of its corrupting influence by Diana earlier on. Believing he could wield it mercifully while making war fair and just, he succeeded in killing Ares but was turned into a merciless warrior himself who started to see his old code as worthless. Despite learning that Diana had actually survived and was only stunned by Ares, Bruce was too addicted to the power of the helmet to let it go. He in fact chose to kill the woman he loved rather than risk losing the helmet. And then with virtually unlimited power and no sense of morality, Bruce went on to wage war on the entire world. Because, you know, gotta love angry Batman. This is basically just Injustice, Superman, but Batman. Getting close to the end, and at number 3, Red Death. Red Death is a villainous amalgamation of Batman and the Flash. Possessing super speed and a bloodlust like no other, his origin on Earth -52 is a dark one. Batman started off fighting crime with Robin, obviously, but Robins kept dying. Robin after Robin, none would survive. So Batman grew increasingly extreme within his methods and basically lost all sense of morality. This led him to then seek out Barry, the Flash, for his Speed Force powers. However, when Barry refused to comply, Batman used weapons from his various enemies to incapacitate Barry. Batman then rigged up a cosmic treadmill to his Batmobile somehow. I don't know how a treadmill is gonna help power a car, but then he attached Barry to the hood and drove them both into the Speed Force, causing a fusion of the two. The resulting entity was an evil Batman with super speed and a lust for death, while Barry's consciousness was trapped inside of Bruce's body. Oh boy. Red Death was later approached by the Batman Who Laughs and convinced to join Barbados' Dark Knights, whose aim was to conquer the multiverse, because of course it is. The logistics of how this came to be are unclear, but it's still freaking terrifying. I don't know how a treadmill makes the Batmobile able to get into the Speed Force, but you know what? 88 miles an hour, Marty. Let's go. Penultimately, in at number 2, Batman Beyond. Amanda Waller, director of Project Cadmus, needed a new Batman to continue to fight for justice, and saw genetic engineering as the solution. She created Project Batman Beyond by using Bruce Wayne's DNA to rewrite a male human's reproductive material, and found a couple in Gotham City with a psychological profile nearly identical to that of Bruce's parents, the McGinnises. Warren McGinnis was secretly injected with a nanotech solution that rewrote his DNA to basically be Bruce's, and then a year later, Terry was born with half of his mother's genetic material and half of Bruce's. To complete Terry's origins to become a crime fighter, Amanda planned to have the same trauma that inspired Bruce to become Batman happen to Terry's parents. Yes, this woman plotted to have a kid's parents assassinated right in front of him. After a night at the theater watching The Grey Ghost Strikes, Amanda had the Phantasm go over to kill Terry's parents. However, Phantasm refused to go along with the plan and allowed the McGinnises to continue on, unaware of what might have happened that night. Terry still became the new Batman, fighting for justice in a futuristic Gotham City, but still, come on, Amanda. I mean, like, I know you're Amanda Waller, but like, still, come on, okay? But also, Batman Beyond is like iconic and everyone loves it. And finally, in at number 1, The Batman Who Laughs. The story of Batman of Earth -22 was not much different from that of any other version of the Caped Crusader. When he was a boy, Bruce watched his parents get killed in an alleyway, vowing vengeance against crime. He trained for years and years to become a hero and then became Batman, fighting supervillains in Gotham. But everything went sideways for this Batman when the Joker started a killing spree across Gotham. The clown had discovered that he was dying from the same chemicals that had actually turned him into what he was, and wanted to take everyone with him. He killed all of Batman's enemies, including Penguin, Catwoman, Killer Croc, and the Ventriloquist, and the Joker also killed Commissioner Gordon, who accidentally sprung an acid trap on his notebook and melted his face off. After bombing a hospital and recreating the scene from Bruce's parents' death right in front of him multiple times, this Batman lost control and broke Joker's neck. Unbeknownst to Batman though, the Joker exhaled a toxin that contaminated Bruce's heart, which infected anyone close to him if he had died. In this case, it was Batman. So this caused him to snap and basically become the new Joker before taking over Earth -22 and later on gaining cosmic power. So yeah, I'm gonna put that at number 1. That's terrifying but also dope.
Coming in at number 10 is Superior Spider-Man. This version of Spider-Man is technically not an alternate. He comes from the 616 Earth and fits into the regular Spider-Man continuity, but so many of you guys suggested this Spider-Man, and how am I going to say no to you guys? For those of you who don't know, the Superior Spider-Man is actually Dr. Otto Octavius, but you may have noticed he's decidedly less out of shape, and that's because Otto was able to finally defeat Spider-Man by transferring his consciousness out of his own dying body and placing it into the healthy, superpowered body of Peter Parker. With Peter's consciousness seemingly passing away inside of Otto's body, it's like Freaky Friday, only much more serious and with Spider-Man. You might think that a villain inhabiting the body of Spider-Man would be a bad thing, and in some ways, you are right. Otto was extremely ruthless when using the powers of Spider-Man, but the thing is, he was still operating as a heroic Spider-Man. Inside the body of Spider-Man and sharing all of Peter's memories, Doc Ock had a bit of a change of heart and decided to use his vast intelligence and unrelenting nature, dedicating himself to being a better hero, a superior Spider-Man. Number 9, Spider-Punk. First appearing in Amazing Spider-Man Volume 3, number 10 from November 2014, Hobart Hobby Brown became Spider-Man when he got bit by a radioactive spider from illegal waste dumping and decided to use his powers to go against the authority. Hell yeah. The President of the United States in this reality is Norman Osborn, who is also still the CEO of Oscorp. Funnily enough, Oscorp in this reality also created Venom, aka VENOM, aka Variable Engagement Neurosensitive Organic Mesh. So, Venom here is created in a lab, like a bioweapon, one that President Osborn gives to his lackeys and dons on himself. So it's an army of Venom-powered soldiers led by a Venom-powered President Norman Osborn. But Spider-Punk also has many of his own followers behind him. Fighting for their beliefs, the Spider Army is a group of punks ready to stand their ground with Spider-Man as their punk rock leader. Unfortunately for Osborn, their Venom is just as weak to sound as the Venom we all know and love. And we are shown this when Spider-Punk plays his electric guitar at full volume, completely blasting away the symbiotes as the two groups clash. He bashed his guitar on Norman's head, defeating him and liberating everyone. And it was awesome. Super cool. But moving on to number 8, Exiles. Tony Stark, the undisputed monarch of Earth. What? Yes. You take a man with the intelligence, wealth, and power of Anthony Stark and make him unbothered by any kind of sense of morality, and that's a man who can bring the world to its knees. But he also has the sense to not let them know it, and then be begged to take charge. Tony Stark of Earth 42777 acquired every world conglomerate, he organized a mutant war against humanity, and then defeated their leader, Magneto. He created a worldwide famine, the likes of which was never seen before, and then he invented the cures and vaccines to fix it. He then got elected president. He developed weather controlling technologies to create biblical level natural disasters in Europe and Asia, having them beg for help to the point of giving up their own control. Central America and Canada had economic down spirals that brought them into the fold as well, and he made a deal with Dr. Doom, who had attacked the Capitol and taken out all the other democratic leaders in America. And then he destroyed Doom after receiving a blast to the face that left him disfigured, just like Emperor Palpatine. He's D-Life the Hulk. This version of Tony Stark is ruthless and powerful, and that is why he's on this list. Number 7, Ultimate Universe Iron Man. Having your mind and body altered by an Infinity Gem sounds like it could go anywhere. But fittingly for Tony Stark, it led to him being able to physically and mentally interact with pretty much any computer ever. And that's a pretty good ability for someone who flies around in a technological suit of armor. The Antonio Stark of Earth 1610, or the Ultimate Universe, has basically become part man, part machine. Kinda like Cyborg, but not really. Being able to project his mind into computers and androids, allowing him to be nigh unkillable, proven when the Master, aka Reed Richards, of this universe seemingly brought his demise, but he became a non-physical entity which could manifest itself via computer systems. When actually physically inhabited inhabiting an Iron Man armor, he gains the usual abilities, plus force fields and cloaking, but he's also got nanites in his bloodstream that he uses to control his suits, as well as open locks, defuse little boom booms, and interact with all forms of technology before he gets infused with an Infinity Gem and becomes super cool. Number 6. Iron Hammer. The Iron Man from the 2018 comic book event Infinity Warps blended the characters of Iron Man and Thor to make for one of the most powerful versions of Tony Stark ever. For some backstory, this warp world was created when Gamora gained the power of the Infinity Stones, and she used them to fold the universe in half, merging souls together, creating amalgamated heroes like Stark Odinson. This awesome version of Iron Man and Thor enjoys virtual immortality thanks to his Asgardian physiology, along with superhuman strength and endurance. His hammer, Mjolnir Iron, I know, stupid name, just go with it, has all the same powers as the regular Mjolnir, but it also grants Stark his armor, which is now a mystical suit of Asgardian armor that does all the same cool things. Since both Thor and Tony kind of had daddy issues, this version of the mix also has their father, Howard Odin, playing a big part in the story too. It's just really awesome. Okay. Number 5. Iron Maniac. Coming at us from the alternate Earth of 5012, the Iron Maniac shows readers what a totally evil version of Tony Stark would look like, other than the Exiles version. That one's also really evil. This Tony Stark from this war-torn version of the Marvel Universe has done some truly horrible things following the loss of so many of his fellow heroes at the hands of a villain named Titanus. Using a really cool armor that also somewhat resembles Doctor Doom's armor, the Iron Maniac went against the Fantastic Four and even took the life of Johnny Blaze in his native universe. His advanced armor repels some magical attacks as well as generates a neural dampening field that mitigates telepathic and telekinetic attacks to some degree, which really helped him out to be absolutely terrible. Reed Richards of Earth 5012 eventually found a way to send this Tony Stark to the 616 universe, where he faced the 616 Fantastic Four and eventually the New Avengers, showing just how powerful this evil Iron Man actually is, and making us thank our stars that normal Tony Stark is a good guy. Number 4. Iron Lantern. The Amalgam Universe combined the world's two biggest comic book companies, DC and Marvel Comics, during a time of utmost peace and prosperity. Just kidding, this was in the 90s. This crazy event pitted popular characters from both sides against each other and even fused some characters together. One incredibly cool amalgamation would be between Iron Man and Green Lantern. Harold Stark, HAL for short, was the founder of Stark Aircraft, and while test flying a prototype aircraft, it suddenly took off on its own to a crashed alien spaceship, and it crashed itself yards away. The crash left shards of metal in Stark's chest, which after meeting the dying alien, Roman Sur, Stark survived using an alien battery that suspiciously was in the shape of a lantern to build a suit of armor. This armor not only kept him alive though, it gave him the ability to create green solid energy constructs, fire plasma bolts, fly at speeds beyond the speed of light, time travel, and it granted him almost unlimited telepathic powers. He also had translation of virtually any language, force field generation, and the ever classic superhuman strength and durability. Yeah, he'll put his hand on your chest, like this. He'll go, stop. And then he'll fire a little repulsor beam out. Number 3. Iron Man and Doctor Strange. So it turns out that Tony Stark is a good fit to become the Sorcerer Supreme, and honestly, when you think about the intelligence of the guy, it makes a decent amount of sense. In What If issue number 113 from 1998, Tony Stark and Stephen Strange meet at a party, and after leaving together, Tony is the one driving when they get into the car crash that would normally ruin Strange's hands. Where in the normal continuity, Stephen has to deal with his hands relatively alone, in this What If, it leads Tony on a journey fueled by guilt to try and repair Strange's hands. Eventually, it leads him to the Ancient One, which in turn leads to him becoming the master of the mystic arts, learning how to infuse his tech and armor with magic to create a much more capable hero. As for Stephen though, he becomes almost like Baron Mordo and betrays Stark to Dormammu. Luckily, this isn't a list of better Stephen Strange alternates. Number 2. All New X-Men Annual number 1. But just to hammer home the idea idea that Stark would make a great Sorcerer Supreme, we actually have more than one alternate reality where this takes place. The second one I want to talk about today would be in all-new X-Men Annual number 1 from 2014. This story showed us Iron Man from the temporary reality number of 591. Tony in this reality brought together the Avengers to permanently end the threat of Thanos on the universe, which resulted in the alien races of said universe rewarding the Earth and its heroes with advanced alien technology, turning the Earth into a utopia. Tony himself would start to lean more into his mystical side with all the extra time he had after saving the universe, eventually becoming the Sorcerer Supreme and being able to solve further conflicts without needing any kind of real fighting. Now, last I've seen, this Tony was living youthfully comfortable at 126 years old. There are even more versions of Sorcerer Tonys out in the multiverse, but you can go find them yourself, because I'm done. After this number 1 point, Robert Downey Jr. Look, we can talk about magical Iron Mans all day, but nothing can really stand up to the closest thing we got to a real Iron Man. Robert Downey Jr.'s portrayal of Tony Stark was the whole groundwork for the MCU, and his character endured for years. Taking aspects of the original character and adding some realism and a really likable performance made for a version of Iron Man that boosted up not only the comic book character's popularity, but through the MCU, it boosted up the popularity of comic books in general, and for us here at Top 10 Nerd, that is quite a statement. Being in a world that is a bit more grounded and relatable to our own, this Iron Man doesn't have as complex of a story, nor is he more powerful as his comic book counterpart, but he is more than impressive enough without that. Not to mention, he was the one to actually defeat Thanos in the end. His send-off from the MCU affected people who don't even read comic books, and I think that says a lot. Kicking off our list at number 10, Spider. We are kicking off the list talking about a Peter Parker variant that's bonded with the Carnage symbiote coming from Earth 15 known as the Spider. This Peter coming from Earth 15 is a much more sadistic version of the web swinger. He's also a ginger, so that tells you all you need to know. The Spider claims that he has been sentenced to a total of 67 life sentences in prison for the crimes that he has committed, but of course, to make him just a bit more lovable, he has a great sense of humor, very much like that of Deadpool. It's great if you can look past a lot of the extra creepy factors of his character. The Spider was introduced in Exiles number 12 and was a big part of the reality-saving team featured in it, being a sometimes leader of said team. He was a very interesting take on what most people are used to from Spider-Man, having only like his humor and his leadership to make him genuinely likable. As a Carnage-bonded sociopath, he was pretty powerful, but he nonetheless was sent a one-way ticket to the afterlife with a blast from Firestar in Exiles number 44. Number 9, The Amazing Spider. This version of Spider-Man, similar to the Spider, is also evil, but instead of this being caused by a symbiote, on Earth 11638, it's actually the inclusion of Uncle Ben that makes this character go bad. In this world, Uncle Ben never loses his life, and instead, he helps train Peter Parker with his new spider powers, and eventually even helps him to form Parker Industries. Peter and Uncle Ben end up building a machine that allows Peter to lure other alternate versions of Spider-Man to this reality, where he promptly absorbs their powers to increase his own. It's incredibly evil, but it makes him the most powerful hero on that Earth and eliminates the need for any other hero to even exist. His whole plan came unraveled when he tried to do this to the Spider-Man from Earth 616 though. When faced with our main Spider-Man, the powerful version of Peter loses his life and his soul is sent to Hell, where he becomes fused with the spirit of vengeance, becoming the Ghost Rider Spider. And it's incredibly cool. Number 8, Punisher Noir. The 2009 Noir series from Marvel Comics saw several heroes existing in the Prohibition era post-World War I. Kicking off with the hit of Spider-Man Noir, other characters like Iron Man, Daredevil, the X-Men, and of course, the Punisher soon followed. In this timeline, Frank Castiglione Sr. was a hero of World War I, who had a huge skull tattoo on his chest as a means of intimidating his German opponents in the trenches. And he was also like an American James Bond style hero going on missions against the Russians and Germans. Unfortunately though, when he returns from the war, he finds himself dispatched from life because of his previous government missions. I bet you thought he would be the Punisher here, huh? Well, you're wrong, because after finding his father's arsenal, Frank Jr. wears a skull emblazoned balaclava and hunts down his father's executioners, who turn out to be noir versions of Jigsaw, Bullseye, and Barracuda, before a final run-in with a fan favorite, the Russian. While some of the noir characters missed the mark in my eyes, Punisher Noir is actually pretty great. Number 7, 5 Ronin. While we're on the topic of historical versions of Frank Castle, I have to mention one of my favorite little stories. 5 Ronin from 2011 moves the Marvel Universe back in time to ancient feudal Japan, with 5 issues each focusing on samurai versions of the Punisher, the Hulk, Deadpool, Psylocke, and Wolverine. It is so cool. Each character gets a short standalone story where all of them eventually encounter the wandering Deadpool, who narratively links them all together for us. This version of the Punisher shows him returning to Japan from war in Korea to find a rival has taken the opportunity to take away his family and claim his land. As is usually the case with Frank Castle, or in this world, Akagi, this leads to some ruthless revenge. Wielding a katana and a big old blunderbuss that I forget the name of, Samurai Frank brings a decided end to anyone that attempts to cross his path during his quest for vengeance. Number 6, Franken Castle. After he was taken off the board by Daken on orders from Norman Osborn during the Dark Reign event, Frank Castle, yes, the Punisher, was revived by the Legion of Monsters as an undead zombie-like monster known as Franken Castle. The Legion resurrected Frank to recruit him in their fight against the villain known as Hellsguard, who was systematically taking out monsters using samurai-like assassins. Although he originally refused to help them, Frank got involved after seeing some innocent little monsters being dispatched too, and that is not something Frank is willing to abide. He went on to slay hordes of Hellsguard's men. It's honestly an incredibly interesting moment in Frank Castle's history, and it got this version of Frank moved to Earth 666. He also nearly enacted revenge against Daken, being stopped by Wolverine before he was returned to his human form through the Bloodstone. But he kept going on in 666, and it's really cool. Number 5, Marvel Universe versus the Punisher. In this universe, the Punisher interrupts an arms deal involving what he thinks is a briefcase nuke, only to discover that it is in fact a man-made virus that, for Frank Castle, makes him immune to infection, illness, and disease. That's pretty good, but it didn't quite do this for everyone else though. Problem here is that the chemical weapon found its way into the water supply and then into the food and started in New York, spreading to the whole world through infected travelers. And then it started turning people and heroes into starting with Spider-Man. An outbreak spread and led to insane events, including a war against the cannibals, who then became the dominant beings of this Earth. But the real star of the show is Frank Castle, the Punisher. This is one of the greatest and most brutal Punisher stories ever. It plays on many of his characters' flaws and strengths, but the story also shows him defeating so many different heroes who you and I have always wanted to see him face, and who we doubt he would actually be able to defeat, but he does it anyways. It's also a surprisingly deep story that has a ton of awesome moments. Definitely check it out. Number 4, Cosmic Ghost Rider. In the Thanos Wins story arc from writers Donny Cates and Jeff Shaw from Thanos Volume 2, one hero who ended up surviving the attack on the Earth by an alternate timeline Thanos was actually Frank Castle, but he did it in a bit of a different way. Frank was hit with debris and actually passed on pretty easily during the final stand against Thanos on Earth. Definitely a lame way to go. So once Frank made it to Hell, he made a deal with Mephisto to return to Earth for vengeance, and he was given the power to do just that as the Ghost Rider, the spirit of vengeance. Unfortunately, when this new Ghost Rider showed back up on Earth, everything was already lost. Being completely alone in the ruins of Earth, Frank went completely insane. Eventually, as he does, Galactus showed up, and being the only Earthling left alive, and a very powerful one at that, Frank made a deal. Galactus was allowed to have the Earth if Galactus made Frank his new herald, granting Frank the power cosmic as well as the spirit of vengeance. These two spent hundreds of years together until Thanos completely flattened Galactus. Then, Frank became King Thanos' #1 dude, going on time-hopping adventures and being completely awesome. Number 3, Space Punisher. In 2012, Marvel showed us a very different version of Frank Castle when they released a 4-issue run called Space Punisher. The series is nuts, super colorful, and heavily inspired by the pulpy sci-fi of the 1950s. There's an awesome robotic sidekick, insane versions of Marvel superheroes and supervillains, including an absolutely monstrous and terrifying version of the Hulk, but it's all centered around a ponytailed, laser sword, blaster-wielding version of the Punisher who finds himself facing space werewolves, space fascists, and space supervillains. It is worth noting, however, that this little weird Punisher story was divisive as hell. Very different from anything before it, Space Punisher was unique to say the least, but it's a comic book. If you can get past the weirdness, it's kind of enjoyable. Number 2, Netflix. We have had 3 movies of debatable quality that have brought Frank Castle to the screen, and while while Ray Stevenson and Thomas Jane, and I guess Dolph Lundgren did decent jobs as Frank Castle, when Jon Bernthal showed up as the Punisher in the second season of Netflix's acclaimed Daredevil show, he did it better than anyone before him. Or, at least for me, it was the most believable version of the Punisher I had ever seen on a screen. Bernthal brought fury and intensity at all times, almost to the point of seeming positively insane, especially when compared with the morals of Matt Murdock. His character was also incredibly capable and brutal, as is necessary for the Punisher to work. When he got his own show in 2017, it brought everything to a whole different level, telling a conspiracy story that also took a really good look at PTSD in soldiers, while also bringing the right amount of brutality that you'd expect from a Punisher story. Even my mom liked this show, and she doesn't even read comics. That's the highest praise I know how to give. And coming in at number 1, Punisher Max. Punisher Max was an adult comic, and for a guy whose main thing is ushering people to the pearly gates, it makes sense that this setting suits his character best. Removing the Punisher from all the costumes and superpowers of the regular Marvel universe and dropping him right into an America facing the early days of the War on Terror, it kicked off with the CIA trying to recruit Frank, which sets off a hugely violent political game. This Frank Castle was a veteran of the Cold War, running Black Ops alongside Nick Fury in Vietnam, and he is not someone you want to mess around with. Like, he lights out Microchip during the first storyline just for helping the CIA to even find Frank Castle. His enemies here are also much more threatening and scarily realistic compared to anything that Earth 616 has thrown at the Punisher. With a big shout out to Barracuda specifically, another former soldier just as ruthless and skilled as Frank is. Punisher Max shows the very real physical and emotional damage that Frank Castle's crusade would cause him in real life. Obviously with a tiny suspension of disbelief that comes with a comic book. If you choose to give it a read, just be warned that it is extremely graphic, and you shouldn't read it unless you're over the age of, like, I'd say 18. Coming in at number 10 is Aunt May. Although extremely warm and caring, Aunt May in the 616 reality has often been portrayed as a somewhat bland, weak, and incredibly helpless character. Aunt May is constantly having health issues, and she's constantly worrying about Peter Parker because he's such a fragile boy. After half a century of development, the most exciting thing Aunt May has done in The Amazing Spider-Man is almost marrying Dr. Octopus. She's sweet, but I think we can do better. No offense. In the Ultimate Universe, Aunt May gets an overhaul. She's quicker, wittier, and a stronger character overall. When she finally figures out that Peter Parker is Spider-Man, she handles it like anyone would, with disappointment and anger that her closest family member didn't trust her enough to tell her. After a short while, Aunt May finally accepts the fact that her nephew is one of the world's greatest superheroes. After his true identity is revealed, Aunt May becomes someone Peter Parker looks to for advice and ultimately becomes the mother he never had, which is what she should have been. Number 9, Professor X. Professor X in the Ultimate Universe is the most powerful telepath on Earth, possessing vast psionic abilities, and was known as one of the most powerful mutants ever. His mutation abilities give him telepathy, astral projection, and this version experiences some telekinetic skills as well, which is different from the 616 version. But honestly, he's here because he is just a little bit morally corrupt. He does things here in the name of the greater good that his 616 self wouldn't dare. There is an obvious example when we look at what happened with Iceman. Bobby was dating a girl at the time when he was inducted into the X-Men. Now this girl had the potential to convince Bobby to leave the X-Men, and Professor X did not like that. He used his powers to erase the memory of Bobby's girlfriend from his mind, just to keep Iceman on the team. He does things like this on the regular, and they often come back to bite him in the butt, which adds a layer to his character and storytelling which I personally find fun to explore. Number 8, Thor. This one may be purely based on the costume over everything else. It was an incredibly power-evoking style change that still called back to the original while trimming the unnecessary extras. But the other interesting thing that this version of Thor brings is a whole question over whether he is in fact a god or not. His full name in the Ultimate Universe is Thorleif Gullman, and he suffered a nervous breakdown before his 30th birthday and began having delusions of Asgard. He was drafted to a project at the Dome that was trying to recreate the super soldier serum that created Captain America, but instead, they went the biomechanical route and created a harness that provided the wearer with the abilities of flight, super strength, and limited invulnerability. Now, Thorleif Goleman, selected as the test subject, was fitted with the suit, but during the testing process, he started ranting about how he now believed he was actually the Norse god of thunder, like actually. For most of the Ultimate series, it was on the fence until the very end when it was finally confirmed that he was in fact the real Thor, marooned to Midgard with amnesia thanks to Loki's schemes. It's an interesting take on the character, and I think it's kinda cool. I like it. Number 7, Rogue. Similar to her Prime Universe version, Rogue, or Marion Carlisle, drains the life force and absorbs the memories and abilities of others through skin-to-skin contact, with the caveat being that she can end someone's life if she holds on too long. In the Ultimate Universe, Rogue actually gets picked up by the Weapon X program and is trained to use her abilities as an assassin. In the Prime Universe, it turns out using her powers on a mutant to the point of ending their life will actually permanently transfer these powers over to Rogue. This happened twice. First time was with Gambit. She drained his life force when he was already near the end after a fight with the mutant Juggernaut, and she gained his kinetic energy manipulation abilities plus sometimes his accent. The second time she did this, she drained the powers of Juggernaut himself when he was near death, gaining his abilities permanently, giving her the strength to throw cars, the durability to withstand demolishing buildings, super speed, and limitless stamina. Seeing Rogue wielding both Gambit's and Juggernaut's powers is strange, and yet very, very awesome.
In at 6, Nova. Star-Lord and his partner Gamora, both of Earth 94241, were a daring duo with a shared mission to locate the elusive Infinity Stones. Their first successful heist involved stealing the Space Stone from the devastated Nova HQ, which had fallen victim to the Annihilation Wave. Their triumph was short-lived, as they found themselves pursued by the relentless Bacchian clan. In a surprising turn of events, Star-Lord managed to strike a deal with Eve Bacchian, convincing her to purchase the Space Stone in exchange for 3 coveted Nova Stars. Sounds like I'm playing Mario Party. Discovering that their goals were aligned, both parties seeking to rid the universe of the Annihilation Wave as well, the Bacchians allowed Star-Lord and Gamora to join their quest in search of the remaining stones. During their perilous journey, a treacherous betrayal unfolded when their supposed ally Thanos seized the Infinity Stones that they had acquired, and then in the ensuing chaos, a colossal insectoid threat was unleashed, which is pretty freaking nuts and honestly kind of epic. Why would you trust Thanos though? I guess it's an alternate universe, so oh well. Halfway through into number 5, Super Mario. Now this one is kind of a joke, yes, but since Mario was voiced by Chris Pratt in the Super Mario Bros. Movie, technically that makes Mario a Star-Lord variant, right? I mean, a load of Mario games also revolve around stars or include them as some form of currency or whatever the case may be. Super Mario Galaxy revolved around stars quite literally. I mean, like, it was in space. Galaxy kinda needs stars in a galaxy. Luna, who's a character in the series, is a star. Rosalina has the star wand. Mario's main goal in Mario Party is to collect stars, which are highly coveted. He's a Lord of Stars, and given that he's voiced by Chris Pratt, and when in contact with a superstar, Mario gains invulnerability and what is basically celestial adjacent powers, or some would say celestial descendant powers. Yeah, I'm gonna count Super Mario as a Star-Lord variant, okay? And if you want to get mad at me for it, go right ahead. I'm sure plenty of you want to give me a piece of your mind already anyway. In it for Cyborg. After the events on Aveline 4, where Star-Lord's actions inadvertently caused the loss of 350,000 lives while saving millions of others, he couldn't escape the weight of the collateral damage that he had caused. Faced with the gravity of his actions, he made the difficult decision to turn himself in, along with the Fallen One, to the Nova Corps for judgment. The public's opinion of Quill was divided, but he took responsibility for the tragedy. Subsequently, both Star-Lord and the Fallen One had found themselves imprisoned on the notorious intergalactic penitentiary known as the Kiln. It was during this time of confinement that Peter made a significant choice. He opted to undergo his first cybernetic implant, a symbolic gesture of distancing himself from his own humanity, because I mean that's what put him in there in the first place, really. While incarcerated, Peter formed an alliance with Chalk, Gladiator, and Thanos, fearing the immense power of the enigmatic figure known as the Maker. They shared crucial information about her background with Thanos and sought his aid, but the Mad Titan ultimately walked away. But still, he became a cyborg, and that's pretty dope, because, you know, part robot people are awesome, a la Power Rangers Red Ranger. You know, if you know, you know. Getting close to the end, in at number 3, Old Man Quill. Prior to Red Skull's rise to power and the downfall of the United States, Star-Lord assumed the role of Emperor within the Spartax Empire. During his time, he entered into a union with Lyssa, who gave birth to their 2 children, Meredith and Jason. Though his responsibilities as Emperor prevented him from joining the Guardians on a critical mission that led to Groot's demise, the decision strained his relationship with the rest of the team. In the aftermath of the rebellion and the subsequent years as Emperor, Star-Lord remained unaware of the events unfolding on Earth. However, everything changed when the colossal Church of Truth launched a brutal assault on his planet, resulting in the tragic loss of his family. So, consumed by grief and despair, Quill lived in seclusion for years, cutting off from the Guardians and the wider universe. Then, a message arrived from the dying Guardians, revealing that Star-Lord represented the last hope to defeat the Church. And I mean like the one that had attacked his planet, not like Cavalry Baptist, you know. But ultimately, in at number 2, Age of Ultron. Star-Lord of Earth 26111 is a valiant member of the Defenders who was enlisted by Tony Stark to safeguard the world from the relentless menace posed by Morgan Le Fay. Alongside his fellow Defenders, he engaged in a fierce battle with Wolverine and the Invisible Woman from an alternate reality, mistakenly believing them to be Skrull imposters. As Tony Stark interrogated the displaced visitors, tragedy struck when Morgan Le Fay launched a devastating assault on New York City. Star-Lord and his fellow Defenders valiantly confronted the Sorceress and her formidable forces. However, their heroic efforts came to a tragic end when Morgan Le Fay orchestrated the cataclysmic nuclear explosion caused by colliding 2 of Stark's helicarriers. So I mean, yeah, any old man story you know is gonna be messed up. Old Man Logan, Maestro, Spider-Man Reign. And finally, in at number 1, Will Stronghold. That's right, I found a way to shoehorn Sky High into this list, okay? Will Stronghold is the main protagonist and central character of the Disney Channel original movie Sky High. As the offspring of 2 esteemed superheroes, the Commander and Jetstream, Will carries the weight of their legacy on his shoulders. Inheriting his father's incredible strength and his mother's ability to soar through the skies, Will proved to be quite the formidable student at Sky High. But he doesn't start off with powers. So he's the only kid at a school full of the children of superheroes and villains alike to not have any superpowers, despite having 2 superhero parents who are literally the most famous people on the planet. But over time, Will sheds his shyness and timidness, and he grows more confident and actually gains his powers. Through his journey, he gains popularity as well, but also earns the respect and admiration of his fellow students and even teachers. Will's evolution allows him to stand as a true hero, carving his own path and giving his friends hope, who, by the way, one of them is Danielle Panabaker, who plays Killer Frost on The Flash, but she was playing Poison Ivy in this movie. But the reason I have Will on this list is because the legacy that he's trying to uphold is that of the Commander, played by Kurt Russell, who also played Ego, meaning that within the Marvel multiverse, Will Stronghold is a variant of Star-Lord. You're welcome. I had to do it, okay? I had to. It's true. Will Stronghold is Star-Lord confirmed.